Lena Park thought invisibility would keep her safe in a house built on blood and secrets, until the moment she spilled sugar across crime lord Victor Moreau's desk and looked up into eyes that had sentenced men to death. In that heartbeat, everything changed. The maid who scrubbed floors became the woman he couldn't ignore, the vulnerability he couldn't resist, and the obsession he refused to deny. When her past came back to destroy her with lies, Victor didn't just protect her. He claimed her in front of the entire city, turning a servant into his most dangerous asset. This is the story of a girl who learned that sometimes the monster under the bed is the only one who sees you, and sometimes being seen is more terrifying than staying hidden. If you're ready to dive into Lena and Victor's dangerous, consuming love story, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The Moreau estate didn't sleep, even when it should have. At 3 a.m, Lena Park moved through the darkened hallways like a ghost, which was exactly what she'd trained herself to be. Invisible, silent, forgettable. In a house where men carried guns under tailored jackets and conversations stopped the moment she entered a room, being nothing was survival. Her cleaning cart's wheels had been oiled twice that week to eliminate any squeak. Her steps landed on the Persian rugs, never the hardwood between them. She'd learned which floorboards creaked, which doors stuck, which rooms to avoid after midnight when Victor Moreau conducted business that left the air thick with cigar smoke and unspoken threats. She'd worked in the estate for 8 months and had spoken directly to Victor exactly 3 times. Once when she was hired, once when she'd found his watch in the library and returned it to his assistant, once when he'd asked her name and she'd stammered it out so quietly he'd had to lean closer to hear. Each interaction had lasted less than 30 seconds. That was how she wanted it. Lena pushed her cart toward Victor's private office, checking her watch. 3:15. He never worked past 2, and his head of security, Marcus, had confirmed the office was empty before she'd come upstairs. This was her window, the only time she could properly clean the space where Victor spent most of his waking hours, surrounded by ledgers that definitely weren't about legitimate business and phones that rang at all hours with calls that made his jaw tighten. She used her master key on the office door, slipping inside and closing it behind her with barely a sound. The room smelled like expensive leather and the particular brand of whiskey Victor preferred, something Scottish with a name Lena couldn't pronounce. His desk dominated the space, a massive thing made of dark wood that had probably cost more than she'd earned in 5 years. Behind it, floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city, the lights of downtown twinkling in the distance like fallen stars. Lena had cleaned this room 100 times. She knew the routine by heart. Dust the bookshelves first, careful not to disturb the perfectly aligned spines. Empty the trash. Vacuum. Then the desk last, because it required the most care. Victor noticed if anything was out of place, and the last maid who'd accidentally moved one of his files had been gone the next day. She worked efficiently, losing herself in the familiar rhythm. Dust, wipe, polish. These were tasks she could control, small islands of order in a life that had spiraled beyond her grasp long before she'd taken this job. The desk was covered in papers tonight, more than usual. Contracts from the look of them. Though Lena had learned not to read anything, she cleaned around. She carefully lifted each stack, dusting beneath them before setting them back exactly as she'd found them. That's when she noticed the sugar bowl. It sat at the corner of the desk, fine white crystals catching the light from the desk lamp someone had left on. Victor took his coffee black during the day, but late at night, when he worked alone, he apparently allowed himself the small indulgence of sweetness. Lena reached for the bowl to move it, dust beneath it, and return it to its precise location. Her hand trembled. She didn't know why. Exhaustion, maybe. She'd worked a double shift because Rosa had called in sick and Lena needed the overtime. Her mother's medical bills weren't going to pay themselves, and the collection notices had started arriving in red envelopes instead of white. The tremor was small, barely noticeable. But it was enough. The sugar bowl tipped. Lena's other hand shot out to catch it, but she was a second too slow, her reflexes dulled by fatigue. The bowl tumbled across the desk's surface, and the lid popped off, sending a cascade of white crystals scattering across Victor's carefully organized papers. "No, no, no," Lena whispered, frantically trying to brush the sugar away, but that only made it worse. The crystals stuck to her hands, ground into the paper fibers, spread further with every panicked swipe. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was bad. This was exactly the kind of mistake that got people fired, and she couldn't afford to lose this job. The pay was better than anything else she qualified for, and Victor's household manager, Mrs. Chen, had been the first person in years to look at Lena's spotty work history and give her a chance anyway. She grabbed her cleaning cloth, trying to carefully lift the sugar without tearing the documents. But her hands were shaking worse now, and she could feel the hot sting of tears building behind her eyes. Because of course this would happen. Of course she would screw up the one good thing she had going. I didn't realize my office had become part of the late-night cleaning rotation. Lena's entire body went rigid. The voice came from behind her, from the direction of the door she'd been so careful to close, smooth and dark as the whiskey that scented the room. She turned slowly, the way you might turn to face a predator, some primal part of her brain screaming that sudden movements meant danger. Victor Moreau stood in the doorway, jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that looked like they'd been carved from marble. He wasn't a tall man, maybe 5'10", but he carried himself like someone who'd never had to raise his voice to be heard. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, as though he'd been running his fingers through it, and his eyes, cold, calculating, the color of smoke before a storm, fixed on her with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe. "I'm sorry," Lena stammered, the words tumbling out too fast, too desperate. "I didn't know you were still here. Marcus said the office was empty. I was just cleaning and I knocked over the sugar, and I'm so sorry. I'll fix it. I'll replace the papers if any are damaged. I'll—" "Stop." The single word cut through her spiral like a knife. Lena's mouth snapped shut. She stood there, cloth still clutched in her shaking hands, waiting for the hammer to fall. Victor moved into the room, closing the door behind him with a soft click that sounded unnaturally loud in the silence. He walked toward the desk, toward her, with the unhurried gait of someone who knew that everything in his domain moved at his pace, not theirs. He stopped on the opposite side of the desk, looking down at the scattered sugar coating his documents. Lena wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor and cease existing. She'd worked so hard to be invisible, to be nothing worth noticing, and now here she was, the complete focus of a man who could end her employment with a word, who could make her disappear in other, more permanent ways if he chose. "What's your name?" he asked, still looking at the desk. "Lena," she whispered. "Lena Park. You asked me once before, but I know you have a lot of staff, so you probably don't—" "I remember." His eyes lifted to hers, and she felt the impact of that gaze like a physical thing. "You've been here 8 months. You work more than anyone else on staff. You volunteer for the overnight shifts. Mrs. Chen speaks highly of your work ethic." He knew all of that. About her. The invisible maid. "I really am sorry about the mess," Lena tried again, gesturing helplessly at the sugar-coated papers. "I'll stay as long as it takes to clean everything properly. No overtime charge, and I'll be more careful, I promise." Victor reached out and picked up one of the sugar-covered documents, studying it with an expression she couldn't read. "Do you know what this is?" Lena shook her head quickly. "No, sir. I don't read anything I clean around. It's not my business." "But you can read." It wasn't quite a question. "Yes, sir. I have my GED." Something flickered across his face, too quick to interpret. He set the paper down and brushed sugar from his fingers with deliberate care. "Most of my staff are carefully vetted for discretion and loyalty. They understand that what happens in this house, what they see and hear, stays in this house." "I understand that too," Lena said quickly. "I've never talked about anything I've seen here, not to anyone." "I know." He walked around the desk, closing the distance between them until he was near enough that she could see the faint scar along his jawline, barely visible in the lamplight. "Mrs. Chen mentioned you needed this job quite badly. Medical expenses, I believe." Heat flooded Lena's face. She'd never discussed her mother's illness with anyone except Mrs. Chen, and that had only been to explain why she needed the overnight shifts. The thought of her personal struggles being reported to Victor made her feel exposed in a way that had nothing to do with the physical space between them. "My mother has been sick," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "But it doesn't affect my work. I've never missed a shift, and I won't let tonight's mistake happen again." "You're terrified right now," Victor observed, tilting his head slightly as he studied her. Your hands are shaking. You can barely look at me. And yet you're trying to negotiate for your job instead of just apologizing and hoping I don't fire you. Because apologies without action were worthless. Lena had learned that the hard way, in a relationship that had taught her the difference between pretty words and actual change. I need this job, she said simply, and I'm good at it. One mistake in 8 months is a better record than most people can claim. The corner of his mouth twitched. It might have been amusement. You're not wrong. He reached past her, and Lena forced herself not to flinch, not to step back even though every instinct screamed at her to put distance between herself and this man who radiated danger like heat from a fire. His hand closed around the sugar bowl's lid, which had rolled near the edge of the desk. I don't actually need the sugar, Victor said, fitting the lid back onto the bowl. It was a gift from someone trying to buy favor. I leave it out because it annoys my business partners when I don't use it. He set the bowl aside, then began gathering the sugar-covered papers. These contracts needed to be revised anyway. You've given me an excuse to start over. Lena stared at him, unable to process what was happening. You're not firing me? No. He stacked the papers neatly, sugar and all, and set them in what she'd learned was his discard pile. I'm reassigning you. The relief that had started to build crumbled. Reassigning me where? The East Wing has been closed for renovations. They're finishing up this week, and the space will need a thorough cleaning before I can use it again. His eyes found hers again, and there was something in them now, something that made her skin prickle with awareness. I want you to handle it personally. Mrs. Chen will adjust your schedule. It took Lena a moment to understand what he was really saying. The East Wing was Victor's private quarters, the rooms where he slept, where he spent what little personal time he had away from business. Staff weren't allowed there without explicit permission, and even then, only senior members of the household were trusted with that level of access. I don't understand, she said slowly. Why me? Because you've been here 8 months and haven't tried to steal from me, sell information about me, or seduce your way into my bed. He said it matter-of-factly, as though those were common occurrences. Maybe they were. You do your job, you keep your head down, and you don't ask questions. That kind of discretion is valuable. Lena should have felt flattered. This was clearly a promotion, a sign of trust. But something about the way Victor was looking at her made her feel like she'd just been moved from one cage to a smaller, more gilded one. Thank you, she made herself say, because what else could she say? I won't let you down. I know you won't. He moved past her toward the door, and she thought the conversation was over, that she could go back to her cart and her cleaning and try to understand what had just happened. But he paused with his hand on the doorknob, looking back at her. Lena. Her name and his voice sounded different than it had in anyone else's. Deliberate, claimed. Yes, sir? You're not invisible, he said quietly. You never were. Then he was gone, leaving her alone in his office with scattered sugar and the feeling that the life she'd been so carefully building on the foundation of being nobody had just shifted beneath her feet. The next week passed in a blur of activity that felt both routine and completely foreign. Lena finished her regular assignments during the day, then spent her evenings in the East Wing, transforming construction chaos into the kind of pristine order that Victor apparently expected. The rooms were stunning, all dark wood and leather, modern, but with classical touches that spoke to old money and older power. A bedroom with a bed large enough to sleep 4, a bathroom with a shower that had more settings than Lena's childhood home had had rooms, a private study lined with books in multiple languages, some of which she recognized, most of which she didn't. She worked alone, which was both a relief and unsettling. No other staff members were allowed in while she cleaned, which meant no witnesses to how many times she caught herself studying the details of Victor's life. The books he read, everything from philosophy to true crime. The music on his expensive sound system, classical mostly, but with unexpected additions like jazz and old blues. The single photograph on his desk in the study, showing a much younger Victor with his arm around a woman who had his eyes and his smile. Lena never touched that photograph. She dusted around it carefully, aware that she was learning things about Victor Moreau that the invisible maid should never know. He came by twice while she worked. The first time, he simply walked through, checking on the progress, asking if she needed anything. His presence made the air feel thicker, harder to breathe, but he didn't stay long. The second time, she was on her hands and knees scrubbing the hardwood floor in his study when she heard his voice behind her. "You don't have to do that manually. There are machines." Lena sat back on her heels, pushing hair out of her face. "The machines miss the corners and the grain patterns. This is better." He walked over to where she knelt, and she had to tilt her head back to look up at him. From this angle, he seemed even more imposing, backlit by the hallway light, so his face was partially in shadow. "Stand up," he said. It wasn't a request. Lena got to her feet, aware of how she must look. Cleaning clothes, hair tied back in a messy knot, no makeup, the scent of lemon cleaner probably clinging to her skin. She'd never felt the difference in their stations more acutely than in this moment. "I have a dinner tomorrow night," Victor said. "Business associates from the East Coast, the kind of people who notice details." Lena nodded, unsure where this was going. "I'll make sure everything is perfect in the dining room." "You'll make sure you're perfect," he corrected. "You're serving." Her stomach dropped. "Sir, I'm not trained for—" "Mrs. Chen will brief you. You'll wear the formal service uniform, you'll follow her instructions exactly, and you'll remember that you don't speak unless spoken to. You don't make eye contact with the guests, and you absolutely don't acknowledge anything you overhear." His tone was firm, but not unkind. "Can you do that?" "No." She wanted to say no. Serving meant being seen, being present in a room full of dangerous men doing dangerous business. It meant the opposite of invisible. But Victor was watching her with those smoke-gray eyes, and she remembered what he'd said. "You're not invisible. You never were." Maybe invisibility had only ever been an illusion, she told herself. "Yes, sir," Lena said. "I can do that." "Good." He stepped closer, and she caught the scent of his cologne, something dark and woody that probably cost more than her rent. "There's something else you should know." Lena waited, her heart picking up speed for no reason she could name. "I had Marcus run a deeper background check on you after the sugar incident," Victor said. "Standard procedure for anyone who works in my private spaces." Of course he had. Lena felt ice slide down her spine. There were things in her background she'd hoped to leave buried, mistakes she'd made before she learned that some people wore their violence under charm, like a second skin. "I see that you had a restraining order filed against an Evan Cross 2 years ago," Victor continued, his voice dropping into something darker. "Domestic violence. It expired 6 months ago, and you didn't renew it." Lena's hands curled into fists at her sides. "I moved, changed my number. He doesn't know where I am. It's handled." "Is it?" Victor's gaze sharpened. "Because Marcus found 3 instances in the past month where someone matching Cross's description was seen near this estate, near the staff entrance you use." The ice in her spine spread to her limbs. "That's not possible. Evan doesn't know I work here. I've been careful." "People who want to find someone usually can, if they're motivated enough." Victor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Does he have reason to be motivated?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications Lena didn't want to examine. "We were together for 2 years, she said finally, choosing her words with care. "He didn't like it when I left. He made threats, so I got the restraining order, but it's been quiet since it expired. No contact, no problems. Until now, potentially." Victor pulled out his phone, tapped something, and turned the screen toward her. Security footage, black and white, showing a man leaning against a car across from the estate's staff gate. The image was grainy, but Lena recognized the build, the way he held himself. Evan. Her blood ran cold. "When was this taken?" "Yesterday, and twice last week." Victor pocketed the phone. "I don't allow problems near my home, Lena. If this man is your problem, he's now my problem." There was something in the way he said it that made Lena's breath catch. Not quite possessive, but close. Protective in a way that came with sharp edges. "I'll call the police," she said quickly. "File a new restraining order. I'll handle it." The police are slow, and restraining orders are paper. Men like Cross don't care about paper. Victor's hand came up, and for one frozen moment, Lena thought he was going to touch her face. Instead, he pointed to a small scar at her hairline, barely visible but apparently not invisible to him. "He gave you that." It wasn't a question, but Lena answered anyway. "Yes." "Does he know about your mother? About her medical situation?" The question made Lena's stomach churn because, yes, Evan knew. He'd been there when her mother first got sick, had used it as leverage to keep Lena compliant, to make her believe she couldn't leave because she couldn't afford the medical bills on her own. "He knows," she whispered. Victor nodded slowly, something calculating moving behind his eyes. "Then he has leverage, and men with leverage don't walk away quietly." He stepped back, giving her space she hadn't realized she needed. "Tomorrow night at dinner, you'll serve. You'll be visible. And if Cross is watching, he'll see you in my home, under my roof, part of my household." Understanding dawned slowly, then all at once. "You want to send him a message. I want to send everyone a message," Victor corrected. "That what's mine is protected." Lena's mouth went dry. "I'm not. You work for me. You're under my protection, whether you realized it or not." His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I don't tolerate threats to my people, Lena. It's bad for business and worse for morale." She should have argued, should have insisted she could handle Evan herself, that she didn't need a crime lord fighting her battles. But the truth was, she was terrified. Evan had nearly broken her once, and the thought of him coming back, of him finding her when she'd finally started to piece herself together. "Thank you," she said, the words barely audible. Victor studied her for a long moment, and Lena had the unsettling feeling he could see right through her, past the careful walls she'd built, into the fear and exhaustion she tried so hard to hide. "Finish the study," he said finally. "Then go home and get some rest. Tomorrow is going to be a long night." He left her there, kneeling in the lamplight, with the scent of his cologne still lingering in the air, and the terrible dawning realization that invisibility wasn't protection. Being seen by the right person, though, that might be. The formal service uniform was black and tailored in a way that made Lena feel like she was wearing someone else's skin. Mrs. Chen had shown her how to carry the serving trays, how to pour wine without letting the bottle's label face down, how to move through a room without drawing attention while still being immediately available if someone needed something. "The key is to anticipate," Mrs. Chen had explained during the afternoon briefing. "Watch Mr. Moreau. When his glass is half empty, you refill it. When he shifts in his seat, you check if he needs anything. You become an extension of his needs without him having to ask." It sounded exhausting. It also sounded intimate in a way that made Lena's skin prickle with awareness. Now, standing in the kitchen with 4 other serving staff while the guests arrived, Lena tried to calm her racing heart. Through the door, she could hear voices, laughter, the kind of jovial sounds that came from men who'd made their fortunes in ways they'd never discuss openly. "First time serving one of the boss's dinners?" asked Marco, one of the other servers, a young guy who'd been with the household for 3 years. Lena nodded, not trusting her voice. "Don't sweat it. Just stay quiet. Keep the glasses full. And don't stare at anyone too long. These guys are paranoid as hell." Marco grinned. "And whatever you do, don't drop anything. Last server who did that got reassigned to the groundskeeping crew." "Marco, enough scaring the new girl," Mrs. Chen snapped, sweeping into the kitchen with a clipboard. "Lena, you're on Mr. Moreau's side of the table. 3 guests to his right, you'll be responsible for them as well. Standard beverage service, cleared plates between courses, and if anyone asks you a direct question, you defer to Mr. Moreau before answering." Lena swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am." "You'll do fine," Mrs. Chen said, her stern expression softening slightly. "He requested you specifically. He doesn't do that unless he trusts someone." The thought of Victor trusting her should have been reassuring. Instead, it felt like weight settling onto her shoulders, heavy and inescapable. The dinner bell chimed, a soft melodic sound that meant service was starting. Mrs. Chen made a sharp gesture, and the staff filed out of the kitchen in practiced formation. The dining room had been transformed. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over a table set with china that probably cost more than Lena's car. Flowers spilled from centerpieces, their scent mixing with cigar smoke and expensive cologne. And at the head of the table, Victor sat in a high-backed chair that might as well have been a throne, looking completely at ease among men who radiated barely contained violence. Lena moved to her position behind and to the left of Victor's chair, hands clasped in front of her, eyes down. From here, she could see the 3 guests she'd be serving. All men, all middle-aged, all wearing suits that screamed money and the kind of confidence that came from never having to answer to anyone. "Gentlemen," Victor said, his voice carrying easily over the conversation. "Thank you for making the trip. I know your time is valuable." "When Victor Moreau calls, smart people show up," replied one of the guests, a barrel-chested man with silver hair and a Brooklyn accent. "Besides, the food is always worth it." Laughter rippled around the table. Lena used the moment to step forward with the wine, filling Victor's glass first with the precise amount Mrs. Chen had drilled into her. She felt his attention shift to her for just a second, acknowledgement without words, then back to his guests. "Before we talk business," Victor continued, "I want to address something that's been circulating in certain circles." The room's energy shifted, laughter died. Men straightened in their chairs. "There's been talk," Victor said, swirling the wine in his glass, "about instability in my organization, about vulnerabilities, about whether I've lost my edge." Silence. Lena carefully moved to the next guest, pouring his wine with hands that wanted to shake but didn't dare. "I want to make something clear," Victor continued, and now his voice had gone cold, the warmth from moments before stripped away completely. "My organization has never been stronger. My operations have never been more profitable. And anyone who mistakes my recent discretion for weakness is going to learn a very painful lesson about the difference between the two." One of the guests, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a face like a weasel, leaned forward. "We heard you've been distracted, Victor. Personal matters taking precedence over business." "Personal matters," Victor repeated slowly. "You'll have to be more specific, David." David's smile was sharp and knowing. "Just rumors. You know how this business is? Someone sees you leaving the office early, someone else sees you taking calls from unknown numbers, and suddenly there's speculation about whether Victor Moreau has found himself a weakness." Lena's hand trembled as she poured the third guest's wine. She felt the weight of Victor's attention shift back to her, brief but intense, and understood with sudden clarity that this dinner wasn't just about business. It was about her, about Evan, about sending the message Victor had promised. "I appreciate your concern," Victor said, and there was something dangerous in his tone now, something that made the temperature in the room drop several degrees. "But I assure you, I have no weaknesses. What I have are investments, assets, things and people I've chosen to protect because they serve my interests." He paused, and Lena knew, felt it in her bones, that he was going to do it, going to pull her out of invisibility completely. "Lena," Victor said. Her name echoed in the sudden quiet. Every eye in the room swiveled toward her. "Yes, sir?" She forced the words out, forced herself to meet his gaze even though every instinct screamed at her to look away, to disappear. "Bring me the Macallan from my study, the 1962. That wasn't wine. That was whiskey. The kind that cost thousands of dollars a bottle. The kind Victor saved for special occasions or particularly important statements. "Right away, sir," Lena managed, setting down the wine bottle and leaving the room with measured steps that wanted to break into a run. In the study, she found the bottle exactly where Victor had told her it would be, locked in a cabinet whose combination he'd shared with her 2 days ago. Her hand shook as she worked the lock, and she could hear Mrs. Chen's voice in her head telling her to breathe, to stay calm, to remember her training. But this wasn't about training. This was about Victor staking a claim, making her visible to men who dealt in power and intimidation, telling them without words that she was under his protection. Telling Evan, if he was watching. Lena returned to the dining room with the bottle cradled carefully in her hands. The conversation had moved on to safer topics, shipping routes, territory disputes in the South, but she felt the undercurrent of tension still thrumming beneath the words. She approached Victor's chair, presenting the bottle for his inspection before opening it. His fingers brushed hers as he took it, and the contact sent electricity racing up her arm. "Pour for our guests," Victor instructed, "starting with David." The message was clear. The man who'd questioned Victor's focus would be the first to receive his personal whiskey, served by the woman who was apparently the source of speculation. Lena moved around the table, pouring measured amounts into each crystal glass. The whiskey glowed amber in the light, and its scent was rich and complex, speaking to age and care and value. When she returned to Victor's side, he held up his own glass. "A toast," he announced, "to loyalty." to understanding that in this business, strength isn't measured by how much you control, but by how well you protect what matters. The guests raised their glasses, murmuring agreement, but Lena saw the calculation in their eyes. They were reassessing, recalibrating their understanding of Victor Moreau and his priorities. And to new investments, Victor added, his gaze finding Lena's and holding it with an intensity that made her forget to breathe. Sometimes the most valuable assets are the ones others overlook. They drank. Lena stepped back into position, heart hammering, skin too hot despite the room's careful climate control. The dinner continued for another 2 hours. Courses came and went, beautifully prepared dishes that Lena barely registered as she served them. Conversation flowed around her, sometimes touching on business so sensitive she understood why Mrs. Chen had emphasized discretion. She learned things she wished she hadn't, heard names that would mean nothing to most people but everything to law enforcement. And through it all, she felt Victor's awareness of her like a physical touch, his attention tracking her movements even as he negotiated deals and settled disputes with the calm authority of someone who'd never had his word questioned. When the last guest had left, when the dining room had been cleared and the other staff had retreated to the kitchen, Lena found herself alone with the table's debris and the echo of what had just happened. "You handled that well." She spun to find Victor standing in the doorway, jacket discarded, tie loosened, looking less like a crime lord and more like a man who'd just finished a long day's work. "I'm not sure what I handled," Lena admitted. "That didn't feel like just a dinner." It wasn't. He walked into the room and she noticed for the first time how tired he looked, the lines around his eyes more pronounced in the softer light. "David has been making moves in my territory, testing boundaries. He needed a reminder that I don't miss details, and I don't tolerate challenges. By showing him you have a maid you trust with your expensive whiskey?" Victor's lips quirked. "By showing him I have someone in my home I trust enough to put in front of men who would use any perceived weakness against me." He stopped a few feet away from her, close enough that she could see the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw. "You're not a weakness, Lena, but David needed to believe you might be, so he could see firsthand how I respond to threats against what I value." Lena's breath caught. "I'm not... You don't..." "Marcus confirmed that Cross was watching the estate tonight," Victor interrupted quietly. "He saw you arrive. Saw you enter with the staff. Saw you leave 3 hours later." The bottom dropped out of Lena's stomach. "He was here?" "At a distance. Safe distance. Marcus had 2 men tailing him the entire time." Victor's expression hardened. "He took pictures, Lena. Of you. Of the estate. Of license plates from the guests' cars." Panic clawed its way up her throat. "What does that mean? What's he planning?" "I don't know yet," Victor admitted. "But men don't collect intelligence unless they're planning to use it." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Tell me the truth. Is there any reason Cross would think you're pregnant?" The question hit like a slap. "What?" "No, absolutely not." "You're sure? Because Marcus intercepted a phone call Cross made to his brother tonight talking about his girl and his kid and how he was going to get what's his." Lena's legs went weak. She reached for the dining table to steady herself, her mind racing through possibilities, trying to understand where Evan would get such a ridiculous idea. Then it hit her. The hospital. 3 weeks ago, when her mother had been admitted for emergency treatment, Lena had gone to the ER with her. They'd done standard intake checks, including asking if Lena might be pregnant before doing any imaging on her mother. She'd said no, of course she had, but there had been a young nurse nearby, someone Lena had gone to high school with. Someone who'd known she dated Evan. Someone who might have overheard and misunderstood and started a rumor that had somehow made its way back to him. "There was a misunderstanding," Lena said, forcing the words through numb lips. "At the hospital where my mother is being treated. I'm not pregnant. I haven't been with anyone in 2 years, not since Evan. But someone might have thought, people talk, they assume." "He thinks you're carrying his child," Victor said flatly. "And he thinks you're working for me, living under my roof, which means he probably thinks I'm the reason you left him." "That's insane. He's insane." But Lena could see the terrible logic of it from Evan's twisted perspective. He'd always been possessive, always believed that Lena belonged to him, that her leaving was a betrayal rather than survival. The idea that she might be pregnant with his child and working for another man would push every one of his buttons. Insane men are the most dangerous kind, Victor said. They can't be reasoned with or bought off. They operate on emotion rather than logic. Lena wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the room's warmth. I'll quit. I'll move. I'll go somewhere he can't find me. Us running is what he expects. It's what he wants. You isolated, alone, vulnerable. Victor moved closer, and Lena found herself looking up into eyes that had gone from calculating to something fiercer, more personal. I have a better idea. What? You stay. Not just as staff, but as someone under my direct protection. You move into the East Wing, into the guest suite. You're seen with me, at my side, in a way that makes it clear to Cross and everyone else that touching you means going through me. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. You want to use me as bait. I want to protect you, Victor corrected, and there was heat in his voice now, something that made her skin prickle with awareness. And yes, I want to draw Cross out so I can deal with him permanently, but those two goals aren't mutually exclusive. You're talking about killing him. Lena should have been horrified. Part of her was. But another part, the part that still woke up gasping from nightmares about Evan's hands around her throat, felt something uncomfortably close to relief. I'm talking about neutralizing a threat, Victor said. What that looks like depends on Cross's choices. Lena wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could handle this herself, that she didn't need a crime lord to fight her battles. But the truth was, she was terrified. Evan had nearly destroyed her once, and she'd barely escaped with her life and her sanity intact. If I do this, she said slowly, if I stay and let you protect me, what do you get out of it? Something flickered in Victor's expression. Surprise, maybe, that she'd ask. Peace of mind, he said after a moment, knowing that someone I've chosen to trust isn't going to disappear or get hurt because I couldn't be bothered to act. You barely know me. I know enough. His hand came up, and this time he did touch her, fingers gentle, as they tilted her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. I know you work harder than anyone else on my staff because you're trying to save your mother. I know you got out of an abusive relationship instead of staying because it was easier. I know you've been invisible by choice, not circumstance, because being seen felt dangerous. His thumb brushed her jaw and Lena's breath stuttered. I know that when you spilled sugar on my desk, your first instinct was to negotiate instead of just apologizing. That tells me you're stronger than you think you are. And I protect strong things, Lena. They're more valuable in the long run. She should step back, should put professional distance between herself and this man who could destroy lives with a phone call. But she was so tired of being afraid, of running, of trying to be small enough that the world wouldn't notice her. Okay, she whispered. I'll stay. Victor's expression shifted into something that might have been satisfaction or might have been something darker, more possessive. Then we start tomorrow. You'll move into the East Wing. You'll accompany me to public events as my companion. We'll make sure Cross gets the message loud and clear that you're no longer available. Your companion, Lena repeated, tasting the word. It wasn't quite girlfriend, wasn't quite employee, existed in some nebulous space between that felt dangerous and thrilling in equal measure. Unless you'd prefer a different title, Victor said, and there was dark amusement in his voice now. Lena thought about it, about what she was agreeing to, what it would mean, how it would change everything. Companion works, she said finally. Victor's smile was sharp and satisfied. Then go home. Pack what you need. Tomorrow, your old life ends and something new begins. He stepped back, giving her space, but Lena could still feel the ghost of his touch on her skin, warm and claiming. She left the dining room on unsteady legs, her mind whirling with everything that had just happened, everything that was about to happen. Behind her, she heard Victor's phone ring, heard his voice drop into business mode as he answered. But for just a moment before the door closed, she caught his words. Marcus, I want eyes on Cross 24/7. He makes a move toward her. He so much as looks in her direction wrong. You call me immediately. The possessiveness in his tone should have scared her. Instead, for the first time in 2 years, Lena felt something other than afraid. She felt claimed, protected, seen, and maybe, just maybe, that was worth the price of no longer being invisible. The guest suite in the East Wing was larger than Lena's entire apartment. She stood in the doorway the next morning, her single duffel bag feeling absurdly inadequate against the backdrop of cream-colored walls, polished hardwood floors, and furniture that looked like it belonged in a design magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the estate's gardens, where early morning light painted everything in shades of gold and amber. "Mrs. Chen had the closet stocked with basics in your size," Victor said from behind her, making her jump. She hadn't heard him approach, which seemed to be a skill he'd perfected, moving through his own domain like smoke. "If you need anything else, let her know." Lena turned to find him already dressed for the day in charcoal gray slacks and a white shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows in a way that somehow made him look more dangerous rather than casual. His hair was still damp from a shower, and she caught the scent of his soap, something clean and expensive that made her hyper-aware of her own unwashed state after a sleepless night of packing and second-guessing. "This is too much," she said, gesturing helplessly at the suite. "I don't need all this space. I could stay in the staff quarters." "The staff quarters don't send the right message." Victor walked past her into the room, moving to the windows with the easy confidence of someone who owned everything he surveyed. "Cross needs to believe you're more than an employee. This suite connects to mine through a shared sitting room. Anyone watching will draw the obvious conclusions." Heat flooded Lena's face. "You want people to think we're sleeping together. I want people to think you're under my personal protection, which means keeping you close." He turned to face her, and his expression was unreadable in the morning light. "What they assume beyond that is their problem, not ours." Lena set her duffel bag on the oversized bed, buying herself a moment to process. 24 hours ago, she'd been invisible. Now she was being installed in a crime lord's private wing, about to play the role of his companion to draw out her abusive ex-boyfriend. "I have conditions," she heard herself say. Victor's eyebrow arched. "Do you?" "If I'm going to do this, if I'm going to let you put me on display like some kind of statement piece, then I need to know the rules." Lena forced herself to meet his gaze, to channel the small kernel of strength that had allowed her to leave Evan in the first place. "What exactly do you expect from me?" Something that might have been approval flickered across Victor's face. "Smart question. I expect you to accompany me to public events, dinners, gallery openings, charity functions, places where I need to be seen and where Cross is likely to hear about it. I expect you to let me introduce you as someone important to me, and I expect you to trust that I won't let anything happen to you." "That's it? Just show up and look pretty?" "You've never been just pretty, Lena. You're interesting, which is far more valuable." Victor moved closer, and she forced herself not to step back. "I expect you to be yourself, the woman who negotiated for her job instead of begging, the one who works overnight shifts to save her mother. That's who I want beside me." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. "Why?" "You could have anyone, someone with connections, someone who actually belongs in your world." "I have plenty of people with connections. What I don't have is someone who looks at me and sees a person instead of an opportunity or a threat." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You spilled sugar on my desk and apologized for the mess, not for inconveniencing someone powerful. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" Lena didn't know what to say to that. The Victor Moreau the world saw was untouchable, dangerous, someone who commanded respect through fear and force. But standing here in the morning light, admitting he valued being treated like a human being, he seemed almost vulnerable. "I have conditions too," Victor said, breaking the moment. "You don't leave the estate without security. You don't meet with anyone from your past without clearing it through Marcus first. And if Cross contacts you directly, you tell me immediately. No trying to handle it yourself." "You mean no trying to protect you from the mess I brought to your door?" "I mean no getting yourself killed because you think you're not worth protecting." His voice had gone hard, and Lena felt the force of his will like a physical thing. "Your life has value, Lena. Start acting like it." The words hit something deep inside her, some wounded place that Evan had carved out with 2 years of telling her she was worthless, that no one else would want her, that she should be grateful he bothered with her at all. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll follow your rules." "Good." Victor checked his watch, and the moment of intimacy shattered as he shifted back into business mode. "I have meetings until 3. Mrs. Chen will take you shopping for appropriate clothing. Tonight, we're attending a charity gala at the Rothschild Hotel. Black tie, high profile, exactly the kind of event that will get attention. Lena's stomach nodded. I've never been to anything like that. Then it's fortunate you're a quick learner. He headed for the door, then paused, looking back at her. One more thing. The bathroom has a lock. Use it if it makes you feel safer. I won't enter your space without permission. He was gone before she could respond, leaving her alone in a room that smelled like luxury and felt like a beautiful cage. Lena sank onto the bed, her duffel bag beside her containing everything she owned that mattered. Some clothes, her mother's jewelry, a photograph of better days. It seemed pathetic next to the opulence surrounding her, a stark reminder of how far out of her depth she really was. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Saw you at a fancy house last night. Moving up in the world, Lena? Bet you didn't tell your new boss about our baby. Call me. Evan. Her hands shook as she stared at the screen. He was escalating, getting bolder. The lie about a pregnancy had calcified in his mind into truth, and now he thought he had leverage. Lena forwarded the message to the number Victor had given her for Marcus, then blocked Evan's number. Her heart hammered against her ribs, and she had to remind herself to breathe, that she wasn't alone in this anymore, that Victor had promised protection. The question was whether she could trust that promise, or whether she'd just traded one dangerous man for another. Mrs. Chen arrived an hour later with coffee and a brisk efficiency that left no room for anxiety. We have 4 hours to make you gala ready, she announced, setting the coffee on the nightstand. That's not nearly enough time, but we'll manage. I don't even know what gala ready means, Lena admitted. Mrs. Chen's expression softened slightly. It means hair, makeup, dress, shoes, and the confidence to wear them. The first 4 I can arrange, the last one you'll have to find yourself. The next few hours passed in a blur of boutiques where nothing had price tags, salons where they shampooed her hair 3 times, and the kind of professional grooming Lena had only seen in movies. Mrs. Chen orchestrated everything with the precision of a general, overriding Lena's protests about cost with a sharp Mr. Moreau's account that ended all discussion. By the time they returned to the estate, Lena barely recognized herself in the mirror. Her dark hair had been cut and styled into soft waves that framed her face. Her skin glowed from whatever treatment the facialist had done. And the dress hanging in her closet, a deep emerald silk that Mrs. Chen promised would photograph beautifully, looked like it cost more than Lena made in 6 months. You look terrified, Mrs. Chen observed as she helped Lena into the dress that evening. I am terrified. Lena watched her reflection transform as Mrs. Chen zipped the back, the silk clinging to curves she usually hid under baggy work clothes. I don't belong at a charity gala. I'm going to say something stupid or use the wrong fork, or you're going to stay close to Mr. Moreau, smile when appropriate, and let him handle the talking. Appropriate, and let him. Mrs. Chen met Lena's eyes in the mirror. He didn't choose you because you know which fork to use. He chose you because you're strong enough to stand beside him without disappearing. I'm a maid who spilled sugar on his desk. You're a woman who survived something that would have broken most people, who works herself to exhaustion for someone she loves, and who had the courage to leave when staying would have been easier. Mrs. Chen's expression turned almost fierce. Don't let anyone make you feel small, Lena, especially not yourself. Before Lena could respond, there was a knock at the door connecting her suite to Victor's. Her heart jumped into her throat. Come in, she managed. The door opened and Victor stepped through, adjusting his cufflinks with the distracted air of someone performing a routine task. Then he looked up, saw her, and went completely still. Lena watched something flicker across his face. Surprise, appreciation, something darker that made her skin flush hot. His gaze traveled from her face down the emerald silk and back up again, slow enough that she felt it like a touch. You clean up well, he said finally, his voice rougher than usual. Mrs. Chen deserves the credit. Lena smoothed her hands over the dress, suddenly self-conscious. Is this appropriate? It's perfect. Victor crossed the room, and Lena caught the scent of his cologne, that dark, woody smell that was becoming dangerously familiar. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small box. This will complete the look. Lena opened it to find a necklace that made her breath catch, a simple platinum chain with an emerald pendant that matched her dress exactly, surrounded by small diamonds that caught the light like captured stars. "I can't wear this," she said immediately. "If I lose it, if something happens, then I'll buy another one." Victor took the necklace from the box, moving behind her. "May I?" Lena nodded, not trusting her voice. She felt his fingers brush the nape of her neck as he fastened the clasp, warm against her skin, and had to suppress a shiver that had nothing to do with cold. "There's something you should know about tonight," Victor said, his hands lingering on her shoulders. "Cross has been making calls, trying to find out who you are to me, whether the rumors are true." Lena met his eyes in the mirror. "What rumors?" "That I've taken a mistress, that I'm distracted, that I've gone soft." His expression hardened. "Let them talk. It serves our purpose. But it also means Cross might try something public, might try to embarrass me or claim you in front of witnesses. What do I do if he shows up?" "You stay calm, you stay close to me, and you let me handle it." Victor's hands tightened slightly on her shoulders. "I won't let him touch you, Lena. That's a promise." She wanted to believe him. Wanted to trust that a man who dealt in violence and intimidation for a living could actually keep her safe from the more personal kind of danger Evan represented. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked quietly. "You could just have Marcus deal with Evan quietly. Why the public performance?" Victor was silent for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low enough that Mrs. Chen, who'd discreetly left the room, wouldn't have heard. "Because men like Cross thrive in shadows. They corner women in private, make threats no one else hears, gaslight their victims into thinking they're crazy or overreacting. I'm dragging him into the light, where everyone can see exactly what kind of man he is. And if that puts me in more danger, then I'll handle that too." He turned her to face him, and the intensity in his eyes stole her breath. "I don't make promises I can't keep, Lena. You're safe with me. Believe that if you believe nothing else." Lena searched his face, looking for deception, for the manipulation she'd learned to recognize in Evan's expressions. But all she saw was certainty, fierce and unyielding. "Okay," she said. "I believe you." Something in Victor's expression shifted, softened almost imperceptibly. "Good. Now let's go show the city what they're dealing with." The Rothschild Hotel was the kind of establishment where the doormen wore white gloves and the chandeliers probably had their own insurance policies. Lena stepped out of Victor's car, a sleek black Mercedes that probably cost more than her childhood home, and tried not to gawk at the red carpet stretching from curb to entrance, lined with photographers and reporters. "They're here for the charity angle," Victor murmured, his hand settling on the small of her back as he guided her forward. "Smile. Don't answer questions, and if anyone asks your name, you defer to me." Lena nodded, her heart hammering so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. The moment they stepped onto the carpet, camera flashes exploded like small supernovas, and she heard the rapid-fire questions being shouted over the crowd noise. "Mr. Moreau, who's your date tonight?" "Victor, is it true you're donating $2 million to the Children's Hospital?" "Mr. Moreau, what's her name?" Victor's hand pressed more firmly against her back, steadying her, guiding her through the chaos with the ease of someone who'd navigated this particular gauntlet 1,000 times. He paused occasionally to acknowledge someone, to exchange a brief word with a reporter he apparently knew, but he never let go of her, never gave her space to feel alone in the crowd. Inside, the hotel's ballroom had been transformed into something out of a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling. Round tables draped in white silk filled the space, each centerpiece a cascade of white roses and orchids. A string quartet played something classical and elegant near the entrance, and servers in formal attire circulated with champagne flutes on silver trays. Lena had never felt more out of place in her life. "Breathe," Victor said quietly, leaning close enough that his breath stirred her hair. "You look like you belong here. Own it." "I look like I'm playing dress-up in someone else's life." "Then play it well. Fake it until it feels real." His hand slid from her back to her waist, pulling her closer to his side in a gesture that looked casual but felt deliberately possessive. "And remember, half the people in this room are faking something. You're in good company." Before Lena could respond, a woman in a silver gown that probably cost more than a car descended on them, all air kisses and practiced smiles. Victor, darling, we were beginning to think you'd forgotten how to socialize. Catherine. Victor's tone was warm but guarded. You know I only attend events worth my time. Your galas always qualify. Catherine's gaze shifted to Lena, sharp and assessing despite the friendly smile. And who is this lovely creature? You've been holding out on us. This is Lena Park, Victor said, and his hand tightened fractionally on her waist. Lena, meet Catherine Rothschild, tonight's hostess, and the woman responsible for making the city's elite feel guilty enough to donate. Guilty is my specialty. Catherine extended a perfectly manicured hand, and Lena shook it, trying to match the woman's confident grip. How did you and Victor meet? I'm dying to know what finally caught his attention. Lena opened her mouth, panic flooding through her because she had no idea what to say, but Victor smoothly intervened. Lena works for me. She has excellent taste and better sense, which is more than I can say for most of my associates. It wasn't quite a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. Catherine's eyes sharpened with interest, clearly reading between the lines. But before she could probe further, a man in a tuxedo approached with urgent whispers about seating arrangements. Duty calls, Catherine said with an apologetic smile. We'll catch up later, darling. Save a dance for me. As she swept away, Lena let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That was terrifying. That was Catherine being restrained. She's usually worse. Victor guided her toward their table, which was positioned near the front of the room with a clear view of the stage. She'll spread the word that I brought a date. By tomorrow morning, half the city will know your name. Is that the goal? Part of it. He pulled out her chair and Lena sat, hyper-aware of the eyes tracking their movements. Cross-monitors society pages and gossip columns obsessively. He'll know I was here with you within hours. Lena accepted a champagne flute from a passing server, more for something to do with her hands than any desire to drink. Around them, the ballroom filled with the kind of people who made decisions that affected thousands of lives, who wore wealth like a second skin, who belonged in this world in ways Lena never would. You're doing that thing again, Victor said, settling into the chair beside her. What thing? Trying to disappear. Your shoulders are up, your head's down, and you're making yourself as small as possible. He reached over and gently tugged her chin up, forcing her to meet his gaze. Stop it. You're here with me, which means you're exactly where you're supposed to be. I don't know how to be this person, Lena admitted quietly. I don't know how to make small talk with people who think a $2 million donation is casual philanthropy. Then don't. Be honest instead. It'll shock them more than any performance. Victor's thumb brushed her jaw before he released her, and Lena felt the loss of contact more than she wanted to admit. Besides, most of them are miserable despite the money. You've survived real problems. That gives you more substance than anything in this room. Before Lena could process that, their table began filling with other guests. A tech mogul and his third wife. A state senator with political aspirations. A real estate developer who looked like he'd had extensive plastic surgery. They greeted Victor with the kind of deference that came from knowing exactly how powerful he was, and their gazes slid over Lena with curiosity barely concealed behind polite smiles. You must be the reason Victor finally decided to rejoin society, the senator said, offering Lena a handshake that lasted slightly too long. Robert Chen, State Senate. And you are? Lena Park, she managed, extracting her hand. Are you in business, Ms. Park? I don't believe I've seen you at these events before. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of, questions she couldn't answer without revealing how completely out of her depth she was. But Victor's words echoed in her head. Be honest. It'll shock them more than any performance. I work for Mr. Moreau, Lena said, meeting the senator's gaze directly. And no, I don't usually attend events like this. I'm more comfortable with a mop than a champagne flute. Silence descended on the table. The senator blinked, clearly not expecting such blunt honesty. The tech mogul's wife looked like she'd swallowed something unpleasant. Then Victor laughed, a genuine sound that made several heads turn. I told you she was refreshing, he said to no one in particular, and his hand found Lena's under the table, squeezing once in what felt like approval. The senator recovered quickly, his political instincts kicking in. Honesty is a rare commodity in this crowd. I appreciate it, Miss Park. The conversation moved on, flowing around Lena like water around a stone. She contributed when spoken to directly, answering questions with the same straightforward honesty that seemed to alternately charm and confuse the people at her table. Victor stayed close, his attention tracking her even when he was engaged in conversation with others, and Lena felt the steady anchor of his presence, keeping her from drifting into panic. Dinner was served, course after course of food that was more art than sustenance. Lena tried to follow the lead of those around her, using the correct fork, not eating too fast, making appropriate noises of appreciation. But her attention kept drifting to the entrance, watching for a face she hoped wouldn't appear. "He's not here," Victor said quietly during a lull in conversation. "Marcus has people at every entrance. If Cross tries to get in, we'll know." "How did you—" "You've been watching the door for the past 20 minutes. His hand covered hers again, warm and steady. "Try to relax. Enjoy the evening." "I'm sitting at a table with people who probably think my annual salary is what they tip their housekeepers," Lena said, keeping her voice low. "Relaxing isn't really an option." "Then fake it." Victor leaned closer, and she caught that scent of cologne and something underneath it that was purely him. "Pretend you're playing a role. Pretend you're an actress who's been cast as my companion for the evening. What would she do?" Lena considered it. "She'd probably be more charming than I am. She'd probably be boring as hell because she'd be trying too hard." Victor's eyes held hers, and there was something in them now, something that made her pulse quicken. "You're interesting because you're real. Don't lose that trying to be someone you're not." The lights dimmed before Lena could respond, and Catherine Rothschild took the stage to enthusiastic applause. She launched into a speech about the Children's Hospital, about the lives they'd saved and the lives they could save with proper funding. And Lena found herself actually listening, actually moved by the stories of children who'd been given second chances. When Catherine announced that Victor Moreau had donated $2 million, the applause was deafening. Victor stood to acknowledge it with a brief wave, completely comfortable being the center of attention, and Lena felt a surge of something she couldn't quite name. Pride, maybe, that this dangerous man used his power for something good. Or maybe just appreciation that there were layers to him she was only beginning to understand. The speeches ended and music filled the ballroom as people began moving toward the dance floor. Lena watched couples glide across the polished floor with practiced grace and felt her anxiety spike again. "I don't know how to dance," she blurted out as Victor stood and extended his hand. "I do. Follow my lead." There was no room for argument in his tone, and Lena found herself taking his hand, letting him guide her onto the floor despite every instinct screaming that she was going to embarrass them both. But the moment Victor's arm wrapped around her waist, the moment his hand engulfed hers, something shifted. He moved with the same confidence he brought to everything else, and Lena discovered that following him was easier than she'd expected. He guided her through a simple waltz, keeping the steps basic, and Lena focused on his chest, on the steady rhythm of his breathing, letting everything else fade away. "See," Victor said after a moment, "you're not falling. Only because you're holding me up. That's what I'm here for." His hand pressed more firmly against her back, pulling her infinitesimally closer. "This isn't so terrible, is it?" Lena risked looking up at him and found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "It's not terrible," she admitted. "It's just a lot. You're handling it better than you think." They turned and Lena caught sight of their reflection in one of the ballroom's mirrored walls. They looked good together, she realized with some surprise. The emerald dress complemented his dark suit, and the way they moved together looked natural, practiced, like they'd been doing this for years. "People are staring," she murmured. "Let them. They're trying to figure out who you are and why I brought you." Victor's voice dropped lower, for her ears only. "Let them wonder. Mystery is more interesting than answers." The song ended, but before they could leave the floor, another began, something slower, more intimate. Victor didn't release her, and Lena didn't pull away. They swayed together, and Lena felt the strangest sense of being exactly where she was supposed to be, even though this world of wealth and power and barely concealed danger was as foreign to her as the moon. "Victor!" The shout cut through the music like a knife. Lena felt Victor tense against her, his entire body shifting from relaxed to alert in a heartbeat. She turned to see a man pushing through the crowd, security guards trailing behind him trying to stop his progress. Evan. He'd somehow gotten past Marcus's people, somehow talked or bribed or forced his way into the gala, and now he was striding toward them with fury written across every line of his body. Lena's blood turned to ice. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe, frozen in place as her worst nightmare materialized in the middle of a fairy tale ballroom. "Stay behind me," Victor ordered, releasing her only to step between her and Evan's approach. But Evan had already closed the distance, and his voice rang out across the suddenly silent ballroom. "Get away from my girl, Moreau. I don't know what lies she's told you, but Lena belongs to me. She's carrying my child, and I'm not letting some crime lord play daddy to my kid." The words echoed in the shocked silence. Camera phones appeared, pointed at them, capturing every second. Lena felt the weight of hundreds of eyes, heard the rustle of whispers spreading like wildfire. And through it all, she felt Victor's presence, solid and unmovable, standing between her and the man who'd nearly destroyed her. "You've made a mistake," Victor said, his voice deadly calm. "A very serious mistake." The music had stopped. Every conversation in the ballroom died mid-sentence. 300 of the city's most powerful people stood frozen, watching the confrontation unfold like spectators at a car crash they couldn't look away from. Evan stood 10 feet away, chest heaving, face flushed with rage and what looked like alcohol. He'd put on weight since Lena had last seen him, his jaw softer, his eyes harder. He wore a suit that didn't quite fit right, probably rented for the occasion, and there was a wildness in his expression that made Lena's stomach turn over with remembered fear. "A mistake?" Evan's voice rose, carrying to every corner of the silent ballroom. "The only mistake here is you thinking you can steal what's mine. Lena, get over here. Now, we need to talk about our baby." Lena felt Victor's hand reach back, finding hers, squeezing once in silent communication. "Stay calm. Stay still. Let me handle this." "Mr. Cross, I presume," Victor said, and his voice had dropped into something cold and precise, each word edged with danger. "I've heard a great deal about you, none of it impressive." "I don't give a damn what you've heard." Evan took a step forward, and immediately 2 security guards materialized at his elbows, hands on his arms. He shook them off violently. "Lena and I have history, real history, not whatever arrangement you've bought her into." The implication made Lena's face burn with humiliation. Around them, she could hear the whispers starting, growing louder, speculation spreading like poison through the crowd. Victor's posture didn't change, but Lena felt the shift in him anyway, like a predator deciding whether to strike or wait. "History," he repeated softly. "Is that what you call 2 years of documented abuse? Is that what you call the restraining order Miss Park had to file to keep you from breaking into her apartment at 3 in the morning? Evan's face went purple. "She told you about that? She tell you how she provoked me? How she—" "I've seen the police reports," Victor interrupted, his voice cutting through Evan's bluster like a scalpel. "I've seen the hospital records from the night you dislocated her shoulder. I've seen the photographs she took of the bruises you left on her throat when you tried to strangle her because she burned your dinner." The ballroom erupted in gasps and murmurs. Lena felt her knees go weak, humiliation and rage warring inside her chest. She'd spent 2 years trying to bury that shame, trying to pretend it had happened to someone else. And now Victor was exposing it all in front of the city's elite. But when she looked at the faces around them, she didn't see the judgment she'd expected. She saw shock, yes, but also anger. Anger directed at Evan, not her. The women especially, their expressions hardening as they looked at the man who'd just confessed to violence in his desperate attempt to reclaim control. "Those were lies," Evan sputtered, but his voice had lost its certainty. "She lied to the police to get sympathy, to— And the baby you're claiming is yours?" Victor's voice grew colder still. "The pregnancy that doesn't exist? That medical records from 3 separate doctors confirm has never existed? Are those lies too, Mr. Cross, or are you simply delusional?" Lena saw the moment Evan realized he'd miscalculated. That whatever information he thought he had, whatever leverage he believed the pregnancy gave him, had just evaporated in the face of Victor's prepared counterstrike. "She was at the hospital," Evan insisted, but his voice had gone desperate now. "Someone told me they heard her talking about being pregnant." Ms. Park accompanied her mother to the emergency room 3 weeks ago, Victor said, and now his voice carried to every corner of the ballroom, addressing the crowd as much as Evan. Her mother, who has stage 4 cancer and requires constant medical care that Ms. Park has been paying for by working 3 jobs. A concerned nurse made an assumption based on standard intake questions, and that assumption became a rumor that made its way back to you. Victor took a step forward, and the security guards tightened their grip on Evan's arms. You took that rumor and turned it into a weapon. You stalked Miss Park. You watched my home. You made threatening calls. And tonight, you crashed a private event to publicly humiliate a woman whose only crime was escaping your abuse. Lena could see Evan deflating, could see the reality of the situation dawning on him. He wasn't facing down a vulnerable woman anymore. He was facing Victor Moreau in front of witnesses, and every word out of his mouth was digging the hole deeper. I just want to talk to her, Evan tried, his voice cracking. Just let me talk to Lena, 5 minutes. That's all I need to explain. No. The single word came from Lena herself, and she was as surprised as anyone to hear it. She stepped out from behind Victor, her hand still in his, but her voice her own. No, Evan. You don't get 5 minutes. You don't get 5 seconds. You don't get anything from me ever again. Evan's eyes found hers, and for a moment she saw the man she'd once thought she loved, before the jealousy, before the control, before the violence. Lena, please. I made mistakes, I know that. But we can fix this. We can go back to how things were. I don't want to go back. Lena's voice was steady now, stronger than she'd expected. I don't want the man who told me I was worthless. I don't want the man who made me afraid to speak, to breathe, to exist. That's not love, Evan. It never was. He's using you, Evan said desperately, gesturing at Victor. Can't you see that? You're just another possession to him, another thing to own. You think you're better off with a criminal than with me? I think I'm better off with someone who sees me as a person, Lena said quietly. Someone who asks instead of demands. Someone who's never once raised a hand to me. Victor's grip on her hand tightened fractionally, and she drew strength from it, from the solid presence of him beside her. You're making a mistake, Evan said, but the fight was draining out of him now, replaced by something that looked almost like grief. I love you, Lena. I've always loved you. You love controlling me, Lena corrected. There's a difference. Catherine Rothschild chose that moment to materialize at Victor's other side, her expression carved from ice. Mr. Cross, you're trespassing at a private event. I'm going to have to ask you to leave before I call the police. The police are already here, Victor said, and Lena turned to see 2 uniformed officers entering the ballroom, followed by Marcus. I took the liberty of calling them when my security informed me you'd forced your way past the door. Apparently you assaulted one of the hotel staff to get in. That's battery, Mr. Cross. Evan's face went from purple to white. I didn't assault anyone. I just pushed past. You shoved a 62-year-old doorman hard enough to knock him down, Marcus said, stepping forward with his phone out. I have the security footage right here, along with footage of you stalking Ms. Park, photographing Mr. Moreau's estate, and making threatening phone calls. The police officers moved to either side of Evan, and one of them cleared his throat. Evan Cross, we're placing you under arrest for assault, stalking, and criminal trespass. You have the right to remain silent. Lena watched as they cuffed Evan, as they read him his rights while the ballroom full of society's elite looked on in stunned silence. She waited to feel triumph, or relief, or satisfaction. Instead, she just felt tired. Tired of being afraid, tired of looking over her shoulder, tired of giving Evan space in her head he hadn't earned. As the police led him toward the exit, Evan looked back at her one last time. This isn't over, Lena. You'll see. You'll come back. You always come back. But Lena didn't respond. She just watched him disappear through the ballroom doors, out of her life with the finality of a door slamming shut. The moment he was gone, the ballroom erupted. Conversation exploded from every corner, voices rising and falling in speculation and gossip. Camera phones that had been recording the entire confrontation were now probably uploading to social media, spreading the story across the internet at the speed of light. Catherine stepped forward, clapping her hands sharply. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption. If we could all return to our tables, the auction portion of our evening is about to begin. She was giving them an out, Lena realized. A chance to pretend the last 10 minutes hadn't happened, to slide back into the comfortable fiction of the charity gala. But Victor had other ideas. He raised his voice just enough to carry across the murmuring crowd. Before we continue, I'd like to say something. The room went quiet again, all eyes on him. Lena felt her pulse spike, wondering what he was going to do, what he was going to say. What you just witnessed was a man attempting to reclaim control over a woman who had the courage to leave him, Victor said, his voice clear and unwavering. A man who believed that lies and intimidation and public humiliation were acceptable tools to get what he wanted. I want to be very clear about my position on this. He turned to look at Lena, and the expression in his eyes made her breath catch. Ms. Park is under my personal protection. Anyone who threatens her, who attempts to harm her, who so much as looks at her wrong, will answer to me. That's not a warning. That's a promise. The weight of those words settled over the ballroom like snow. Lena felt every eye on her, felt the shift in how the room perceived her, not as Victor's temporary companion or his plaything, but as someone he'd just publicly claimed in a way that left no room for misinterpretation. Now, Victor said, turning back to the crowd with a slight smile, let's get back to separating wealthy people from their money for a good cause. Catherine, I believe you mentioned an auction. The tension broke. Laughter rippled through the room, tentative at first, then more genuine. People began moving back to their tables, conversations resuming, the extraordinary moment sliding into the realm of gossip they'd dine out on for weeks. But Lena couldn't move. She stood frozen in the middle of the dance floor, the emerald dress that had felt like armor, now feeling like tissue paper, too thin to protect her from the enormity of what had just happened. Victor's hand touched her elbow gently. Lena, we should sit down. She looked up at him, and everything she'd been holding back threatened to overwhelm her. You told them everything, the hospital records, the police reports, I told them the truth, Victor said quietly. And I made sure everyone in this room knows that you're not a victim to be pitied, but a survivor to be respected. His jaw tightened. If I overstepped, if I exposed more than you wanted, you destroyed him, Lena interrupted, and her voice cracked on the words. In front of everyone, you just destroyed him. Yes. No apology, no justification, just acknowledgement. Lena felt something break open inside her chest, something that had been locked tight for 2 years. Thank you. Victor's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Come on, let's get you sitting down before you fall down. He guided her back to their table, where the other guests were suddenly very interested in their champagne flutes, pointedly not staring even though Lena could feel their curiosity like a physical weight. Victor pulled out her chair, and she sank into it gratefully, her legs shaking with delayed reaction. A server appeared immediately with water, which Victor accepted and pressed into Lena's hands. Drink, slowly. She obeyed, the cool water helping to ground her, to pull her back from the edge of whatever breakdown had been threatening. Around them, the auction began, Catherine's voice bright and persuasive as she cajoled bidders into spending absurd amounts on donated items and experiences. I need to leave, Lena said quietly. I can't sit here and pretend everything's normal after that. Then we'll leave. Victor was already standing, already signaling to Marcus, who materialized at their table within seconds. Everything's arranged, Marcus said in an undertone. Cars out back, away from the main entrance, no press. They slipped out during a particularly enthusiastic bidding war over a weekend in the Hamptons, moving through a service entrance that took them down a back hallway and out into the cool night air. The Mercedes was waiting exactly where Marcus had promised, engine running, back door open. Victor handed Lena into the car first, then slid in beside her. The door closed, and suddenly the chaos of the gala was muffled, reduced to the distant glow of hotel lights through tinted windows. Lena leaned her head back against the leather seat and closed her eyes. She felt wrung out, exhausted in a way that went bone deep. But underneath the exhaustion, there was something else, something that felt almost like freedom. I'm sorry, Victor said after a moment of silence. Lena's eyes opened. For what? For putting you through that. For making it public. He was looking straight ahead, his profile sharp in the dim light filtering through the windows. I knew Cross would try something. I had Marcus plant information about the gala where Cross's contacts would find it. I wanted him to come. The confession should have angered her, should have made her feel manipulated, used. But Lena found she wasn't surprised. Victor was a strategist. Of course, he'd engineered the confrontation, controlled the variables, made sure it happened on his terms in a place where he had all the advantages. You wanted witnesses, she said slowly, understanding. You wanted him to self-destruct in front of people who matter. I wanted him arrested on charges that will stick. Battery caught on camera, stalking with documented evidence, criminal trespass with a ballroom full of witnesses. Victor finally looked at her, and there was something almost apologetic in his expression. A restraining order is just paper. A conviction is prison time. Well, Lena thought about Evan being led away in handcuffs, about the humiliation on his face, about the way his entire narrative had crumbled under the weight of evidence and witnesses. He won't come back. No, Victor agreed. He won't. The car pulled up to the estate's gates, which swung open automatically. Lena watched the familiar grounds appear in the headlights and felt the strangest sense of coming home, even though she'd only lived here for a day. What happens now? She asked as the car stopped in front of the main entrance. Now you decide, Victor said. Cross is out of your life. You don't need my protection anymore. You can go back to your apartment, go back to your normal life if you want. The offer hung in the air between them. Lena studied his face, looking for some hint of what he wanted her to choose, but his expression was carefully neutral. What if I don't want to go back? The words came out before she'd fully thought them through, but once spoken, she realized they were true. What if normal doesn't feel normal anymore? Something flickered in Victor's eyes. Then you stay, but not because you're afraid or because you need protection. You stay because you choose to. Lena considered it. Considered the life she'd been building on invisible foundations, the constant exhaustion, the 3 jobs, the empty apartment that had never felt like home. Considered what staying would mean, living in Victor's world, being part of something larger and more dangerous than she'd ever imagined. Considered the man beside her, who'd seen her at her lowest and hadn't looked away, who'd given her the tools to face her demons and then stood beside her while she did it. I choose to stay, she said quietly. Victor's hand found hers in the darkness of the car, his fingers threading through hers with deliberate care. Then welcome home, Lena Park. The days that followed the gala passed in a strange blur of normalcy and surreality. Evan's arrest made the local news, local man arrested at charity gala after confrontation with crime figure. But the coverage focused more on Victor's public defense of Lena than on the sordid details of her past. Someone had leaked the security footage of Evan shoving the doorman, and that became the story's visual anchor, overshadowing everything else. Lena's mother called from the hospital, having heard about the incident from a gossiping nurse. The conversation had been difficult, painful in the way only conversations with mothers who loved you but didn't understand you could be. You're living with that man? Lena, he's dangerous. Everyone knows what he does. He's been kind to me, Mom. He's helping with your medical bills. I don't want his dirty money paying for my treatment. It's too late for that. The bills are paid. You can focus on getting better. The silence on the other end had been heavy with disapproval and grudging acceptance in equal measure. Mrs. Chen had quietly shifted Lena's official role from household staff to personal assistant, which came with a salary increase that made Lena's eyes water and benefits that included full medical coverage for both her and her mother. When Lena had tried to protest, Mrs. Chen had simply said, "Mr. Moreau takes care of his people. Learn to accept it gracefully." Learning to accept it was harder than it sounded. Lena had spent her entire adult life scraping by, and the sudden absence of financial stress felt almost disorienting. She caught herself checking her bank account obsessively, half expecting the money to disappear, to discover it had all been a dream. But it was real. All of it was real. Victor kept his distance in a way that was both respectful and frustrating. He was away most days handling business. Lena didn't ask about returning in the evenings for dinners they sometimes shared in the formal dining room, sometimes took in the sitting room that connected their suites. They talked about safe things, books, current events, her mother's improving health. They didn't talk about the gala or Evan, or the fact that Lena was living in his home, playing a role that had shifted from necessity to something neither of them seemed ready to define. A week after the gala, Lena was in the estate's library, a two-story room lined with more books than she'd ever seen outside an actual library, when Victor found her curled up in a leather chair reading a first edition of something she definitely shouldn't be touching without gloves. "I've been looking for you," he said from the doorway. Lena looked up, carefully marking her place. "Sorry. Mrs. Chen said I could use the library whenever I wanted." "You can. This is your home. You don't need permission." He moved into the room, hands in his pockets, looking less formal than usual in dark jeans and a gray sweater. "I have news about Cross." Lena's stomach tightened. "What kind of news?" "He took a plea deal, 5 years for assault and stalking, with a permanent restraining order after his release." Victor settled into the chair across from hers, his long legs extending into the space between them. His lawyer tried to argue mitigating circumstances, but the video evidence was too damning. 5 years. Lena tried to process what that meant, how it felt. "That's really over then. He's really gone." "Really gone," Victor confirmed. "You're safe, Lena. Completely safe." The words should have brought relief. Instead, they brought a strange sort of grief. Not for Evan, but for the years she'd lost to fear, for the version of herself that had believed she deserved his treatment. "Hey," Victor's voice had softened. "Talk to me. What's going on in that head of yours?" Lena set the book aside carefully. "I was just thinking about who I was when I was with him, how small I made myself, how I let him convince me that I was lucky he put up with me." "You survived him. That's not small. That's steel." "I ran away and hid. That's not steel." "You rebuilt your life from nothing. You took care of your mother when you could barely take care of yourself. You worked 3 jobs and still found the energy to be kind to people who were invisible to everyone else." Victor leaned forward, elbows on his knees, holding her gaze. "That's the definition of steel, Lena. Just because you didn't fight back doesn't mean you weren't fighting." Lena felt her throat tighten with emotion she didn't quite know how to process. "Why do you care? Really? You could have just had Marcus deal with Evan quietly. You didn't need to get personally involved." Victor was quiet for a long moment, and Lena watched him choose his words with the same care he probably used when negotiating deals worth millions. "Do you know what I do, Lena? What my business actually is?" "I know enough not to ask questions. I control distribution networks, legitimate ones and less legitimate ones. I facilitate transactions that people in power want to happen but can't be seen supporting." He said it matter-of-factly, like discussing the weather. "I've built an empire on understanding leverage, on knowing what people want and what they're willing to pay to get it." Lena waited, sensing there was more. "I'm good at reading people," Victor continued, "at seeing their weaknesses, their fears, the buttons I can push to make them do what I need. It's a useful skill in my line of work, but it also means I see the same manipulations when others use them." His jaw tightened. "Evan looked at you and saw someone he could control, someone he could diminish until you forgot you were ever anything more than what he told you to be. And it worked, for a while. But then you left. I was terrified." "You were smart. Terrified and smart enough to run anyway." Victor's expression turned fierce. "I see people choose to stay in situations that destroy them every day, Lena. I see them rationalize, make excuses, convince themselves it's not that bad. You didn't do that. You saw the truth, and you left, even though leaving was harder than staying. So you helped me because I impressed you?" "I helped you because you reminded me of someone." Victor stood abruptly, walking to the library windows that looked out over the gardens. "My mother. She was with my father for 15 years before she finally left. He was a good man in public, charming and successful. In private, he was something else." Lena's breath caught. Victor never talked about his family, never referenced his past. This felt like a door opening, showing her something vulnerable beneath the controlled exterior. "She left when I was 16, Victor continued, still looking out the window. "Took me and my sister and disappeared in the middle of the night. We lived in motels for 6 months while she worked waitressing jobs and saved up enough for an apartment. My father tried to find us, tried to drag us back. He had money, connections, lawyers. But she was smarter than he gave her credit for. She stayed gone. Where is she now? Florida, remarried to a high school teacher. Happy. Victor's reflection smiled in the glass. She taught me that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's just the ability to wake up every morning and keep going when everything in you wants to give up. Lena stood, crossing the space between them until she was close enough to see the tension in his shoulders. I'm not your mother, Victor. You don't have to save me to save her. He turned to face her, and the rawness in his expression made her chest ache. I know that. But when I saw you that night, covered in sugar and apologizing for existing, I saw someone who'd forgotten how to take up space. And when I found out about Cross, about what he'd done to you, I couldn't... He stopped, jaw working. Couldn't what? I couldn't stand the idea of him winning, of you spending the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, making yourself small, believing you deserved less than everything. His hand came up, cupping her face with a gentleness that seemed at odds with everything she knew about him. You deserve everything, Lena. And I wanted to be the one who made sure you got it. Lena's heart was hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. They were standing too close, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could count the flecks of silver in his gray eyes. What if I don't know what I deserve anymore? She whispered. Then I'll remind you every day until you believe it. His thumb brushed her cheekbone, and Lena felt the touch like electricity racing down her spine. You deserve safety, respect. Someone who sees you as an equal, not a possession. Someone who asks instead of demands. Someone like you? I'm not a good man, Lena. I've done things that would horrify you if you knew the details. You're a better man than you think you are. Lena's hand came up to cover his, pressing it more firmly against her face. A bad man wouldn't have paid my mother's medical bills, wouldn't have given me a job and a home and protection without asking for anything in return. I'm asking for something now. Victor's voice had dropped to something rough, almost pained. What? Permission to kiss you, because I've wanted to since the moment you looked up at me with sugar on your hands and negotiated instead of apologized, and if I don't kiss you soon, I'm going to lose what's left of my mind. Lena's breath left her in a rush. She should be cautious, should think about power dynamics in complicated situations, and all the ways this could end badly. Should remember that she'd just gotten out of one relationship where the man held all the control. But Victor wasn't Evan. Victor asked instead of taking. Victor saw her as a person instead of a possession. Victor had given her back pieces of herself she'd thought were lost forever. Yes, she said simply. Victor's control snapped like a breaking wire. His mouth found hers with a hunger that made her gasp, and Lena's hands fisted in his sweater, pulling him closer, needing him closer. He kissed like he did everything else, with complete focus and devastating precision, his tongue sliding against hers in a way that made her knees weak. Lena had been kissed before, had been in a relationship for 2 years, but this was different. This was being consumed and consuming in return, was giving and taking in equal measure, was feeling seen and desired and valuable all at once. When Victor finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard, and Lena's lips felt swollen and sensitive. He rested his forehead against hers, his hands spanning her waist, holding her steady. I've been trying so hard to be honorable, he said roughly, to give you space, to not push, to let you heal, but you make it very difficult to be honorable, Lena Park. Maybe I don't want you to be honorable. The words came out breathless, bold, more honest than she'd intended. Victor's laugh was low and dark. Dangerous thing to say to a man who's wanted you since the first moment he saw you. You wanted me when I was covered in cleaning solution and holding a mop? I wanted you when you were invisible to everyone else, when you were trying so hard not to exist that you barely left a shadow. His thumb traced her lower lip, and Lena's breath hitched. I wanted to be the one who made you visible again, who reminded you that you were worth seeing. Lena felt something crack open inside her chest, some last wall of defense crumbling. I'm terrified, she admitted. Of me? Of this? Of wanting something good and having it turn bad? Of not recognizing the warning signs until it's too late? Victor's expression turned serious. I'm not Evan. I will never raise a hand to you. I will never make you feel small or worthless or less than extraordinary. And if I ever cross a line, if I ever make you uncomfortable or scared, you walk away. No apologies, no explanations needed. You just walk. And if I don't want to walk, if I want to stay and fight back and tell you when you're wrong, then you do that. His smile was crooked, almost boyish. I like it when you fight back. It's refreshing. Lena found herself smiling despite the fear still curled in her stomach. You're very strange, Victor Moreau. And you're very brave, Lena Park. He kissed her again, softer this time, sweeter, like a promise instead of a claim. Stay with me, not because you're afraid or because you need protection. Stay because you want to, because you see me and I see you, and that's worth exploring. Lena thought about it, about the life she could have if she walked away now, safe, simple, normal, about the life she could have if she stayed, complicated, dangerous, extraordinary, about the man in front of her who'd seen her at her worst and hadn't looked away. I want to stay, she said. Victor's smile was brilliant, transforming his face from dangerous to devastating. Then stay, and let me show you what it's like to be seen. He kissed her again, and Lena kissed back, pouring everything she couldn't say into the press of her mouth against his. Fear and hope and want and trust, all tangled together into something new, something that felt like the beginning of a story instead of the end of one. Outside the library windows, the sun was setting, painting the gardens in shades of gold and amber. Inside, Lena Park stopped being invisible and started being seen, started being wanted, started being everything she'd forgotten she could be. And in the arms of a man who'd built an empire on understanding value, she began to understand her own worth. The kiss in the library changed everything and nothing all at once. Lena woke the next morning in her own bed, in her own suite, with sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked gardens she was still getting used to calling home. But the memory of Victor's mouth on hers, the way he'd held her like she was something precious and powerful at the same time, sat in her chest like a warm stone. She touched her lips, remembering, and felt heat climb her neck. A knock at the connecting door made her jump. "Lena, are you awake?" Victor's voice, rough with morning, did things to her nervous system that probably weren't appropriate before coffee. "I'm awake," she called back, suddenly aware that she was wearing an oversized t-shirt and nothing else, her hair probably a disaster. "Give me 5 minutes?" "Take your time. I'll be in the sitting room." Lena scrambled out of bed, washing her face and brushing her teeth with record speed. She pulled on jeans and a sweater, ran a brush through her hair, and tried not to look like someone who'd spent half the night replaying a kiss instead of sleeping. She found Victor in the sitting room that connected their suites, already dressed in dark slacks and a navy shirt, reading something on his tablet while coffee steamed from the cup at his elbow. He looked up when she entered, and the smile that crossed his face was soft and private, meant only for her. "Good morning," he said. "Morning." Lena felt suddenly shy, unsure how to navigate this new territory between them. Were they dating now? In a relationship? Or had last night been a moment of weakness they'd both pretend hadn't happened? Victor set down his tablet and patted the space beside him on the couch. "Come here." Lena crossed to him, settling into the spot he'd indicated, hyper-aware of the warmth of his body next to hers. He handed her his coffee cup without a word, and she took it gratefully, needing something to do with her hands. "I have a question," Victor said after she'd taken a sip, "and I need you to answer honestly." Lena's stomach clenched. "Okay. Do you regret last night?" The question was direct, like everything about him, cutting through her anxiety to the heart of what mattered. Lena thought about lying, about protecting herself with distance and denial. But Victor had asked for honesty, and she owed him that. "No," she said quietly. "I don't regret it. I'm just not sure what it means. What we are now. What do you want us to be?" Lena handed back the coffee cup, buying herself a moment to think. "I don't know. I've never been good at this part. With Evan, we just sort of fell into being together, and then I couldn't get out. I don't know how healthy relationships work." "Then we'll figure it out together," Victor said simply. "Because I've never been particularly good at this either. I know business, I know strategy, I know how to read a room and close a deal. But this?" He gestured between them. This is new territory for me, too. The admission made something loosen in Lena's chest. You've never had a girlfriend. I've had companions, arrangements, mutually beneficial relationships that looked good in public and asked nothing of me in private. His jaw tightened slightly. I've never had someone I actually wanted to come home to, someone whose opinion mattered more than their appearance on my arm. Lena studied his face, looking for deception, but all she saw was raw honesty. So what are we doing here, Victor? I'd like to date you, he said. And there was something almost vulnerable in how he said it, like he was offering something he wasn't sure she'd accept. Properly. Not as my employee or my charge or someone I'm protecting from an ex, but as a woman I'm interested in getting to know better. A woman I'd like to see if I can build something real with. Lena's heart did something complicated in her chest. That sounds terrifying. It does, Victor agreed, but I think it might be worth it anyway. She thought about all the reasons this was a bad idea. The power imbalance, his dangerous business, the fact that she was still learning how to trust her own judgment after Evan. But she also thought about how Victor looked at her, how he listened when she talked, how he'd given her back her strength instead of taking it away. Okay, she said. Let's try. But I have conditions. Victor's eyebrow arched, and there was amusement in his expression now. You seem to have a lot of those. I'm serious. If we're going to do this, I need to know it's real. Not a power game, not charity, not you feeling sorry for me. I don't feel sorry for you, Lena. I'm in awe of you. There's a difference. The words made her breath catch, but she pushed forward. I need honesty, complete honesty. If something's bothering you, if you're losing interest, if this isn't working for you, I need you to tell me. I can't handle wondering, second-guessing, trying to read between lines. Done, Victor said immediately. What else? I need space to be my own person, to have my own money, my own interests, my own life that isn't just an extension of yours. You already have that. The job is real, Lena. The salary is what anyone with your skills and discretion would earn. You're not dependent on me. And I need to be able to walk away. The words came out harder than she'd intended. If this doesn't work, if we're not right for each other, I need to know I can leave without losing everything. My job, my home, my mother's medical care. I can't be trapped again. Victor's expression turned serious. Listen to me very carefully. Your mother's medical expenses are covered, contract signed, legally binding, whether you're with me or not. The job is yours as long as you want it, and if you decide you don't want it, I'll write you a recommendation that will get you hired anywhere. And the guest suite is yours for as long as you need it, relationship or no relationship. He leaned closer, holding her gaze. You're not trapped, Lena. You never will be. Not by me. Lena felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back furiously. Why are you being so reasonable about this? Because I watched my mother stay with my father for years because she thought she couldn't afford to leave. Because I've seen what happens when love becomes a cage. His hand found hers, threading their fingers together. I want you to choose to be with me every single day. Not because you have to, but because you want to. And if there's ever a day you don't want to anymore, I want you to have the freedom to walk away. It was everything Lena had needed to hear, everything she hadn't known how to ask for. She squeezed his hand, feeling the solid strength of him, the steadiness she was beginning to rely on. So we're doing this, she said. Dating, like normal people. I'm not sure either of us qualifies as normal, Victor said dryly. But yes, we're doing this. He leaned in and kissed her, soft and sweet and promising, and Lena kissed back, letting herself fall into it, letting herself trust. When they broke apart, Victor's phone was buzzing insistently on the table. He glanced at it and sighed. Marcus, I have to take this. Go, Lena said. I should check on my mother anyway. She left him talking in low tones about shipments and territories, things she didn't understand and wasn't sure she wanted to. In her suite, she called the hospital and spent 20 minutes talking to her mother, who was having a good day, who sounded stronger than she had in weeks. The new treatment is working, her mother said, and there was wonder in her voice. Doctor, Shaw says if it keeps working like this, I might be able to come home in a few months. Home. Lena didn't know where that was anymore. The apartment she'd been renting was long gone. The lease expired, her few possessions in storage. Home was this estate, these rooms, this strange new life she was building. "That's wonderful, Mom," Lena said, meaning it. "We'll figure out the logistics when the time comes." After hanging up, Lena found herself restless, unable to settle. She wandered through the estate, still learning its geography, still surprised by the sheer size of it. She found Mrs. Chen in the kitchen supervising the preparation of lunch, and the older woman took one look at Lena's face and shooed the other staff out. "You have the look of someone who needs to talk," Mrs. Chen said, pulling out a chair at the kitchen's small table. "Sit." Lena sat, grateful for the directness. "Victor and we're trying to date, like a real relationship." "About time," Mrs. Chen said calmly, pouring them both tea. "He's been mooning over you for weeks. It was getting embarrassing." "He has not been mooning. He rearranged his entire schedule so he could have dinner with you. He asked me what your favorite foods were. He personally selected that emerald necklace because he thought it would match your eyes." Mrs. Chen leveled her with a knowing look. "Trust me, he's been mooning." Lena felt heat climb her cheeks. "I'm terrified I'm going to screw this up." "You probably will. He probably will too. That's what relationships are. Two people screwing up and figuring out how to fix it together." Mrs. Chen sipped her tea thoughtfully. "But I'll tell you something about Mr. Moreau. I've worked for him for 10 years. I've seen him with dozens of women, and none of them lasted more than a few months because none of them were real to him. They were decorations, arm candy, business arrangements. And I'm different? You're the first one he's introduced to his mother." Lena's teacup froze halfway to her mouth. "What?" "He called her yesterday, told her about you. She's flying in next week to meet you." Mrs. Chen's smile was slight but genuine. "He's never done that before. Not once in the 10 years I've known him." The information settled over Lena like a weighted blanket, comforting and terrifying all at once. Meeting his mother felt huge, significant, like a declaration of intent that Lena wasn't sure she was ready for. "I'm going to mess this up," she said quietly. "I'm going to say something wrong, or be too nervous, or you're going to be yourself, which is exactly what Mr. Moreau wants." Mrs. Chen reached across the table and squeezed Lena's hand. "Stop trying to be what you think people want. Just be who you are." That's been enough so far, hasn't it? Lena thought about Victor asking to kiss her, about the way he looked at her like she was solving equations he'd been trying to work out for years. I guess it has. Then trust it. Trust him. And trust yourself. Mrs. Chen stood, smoothing her apron. "Now, since you're going to be around more permanently, we should discuss your role in the household. The personal assistant title was a polite fiction. What do you actually want to do with your time?" It was a good question. Lena had been so focused on survival for so long that she'd never thought about what came after. "I'd like to go back to school," she heard herself say. "Finish my degree. Maybe study business management." "Then that's what you'll do. I'll have the arrangements made." Mrs. Chen said it like it was simple, like dreams could just materialize with the right resources. Maybe they could. Maybe that was what having money and support actually meant. Not just survival, but the ability to build something beyond it. The week leading up to meeting Victor's mother passed in a blur of normalcy that felt surreal. They had dinner together every night, sometimes in the dining room, sometimes in the sitting room between their suites, talking about everything and nothing. Victor told her about his business, the legitimate parts and some of the less legitimate parts, testing her reactions, seeing if the truth would send her running. Lena didn't run. She asked questions instead, trying to understand the moral gray areas he operated in, the way he justified his choices. "I'm not a good person," Victor said one night over wine in the sitting room. "I've done things that keep me up at night. I've hurt people who probably deserved it, and a few who probably didn't." "But you pay for children's medical care," Lena pointed out. "You donate millions to charity. You employ people who wouldn't get jobs anywhere else because of their records. That's not nothing." "It's penance," Victor said quietly, trying to balance the scales. "I'm not sure it works that way." "I don't think goodness is a math problem," Lena said. "I think it's just choosing to do better when you can." Victor had looked at her for a long moment, something raw and grateful in his expression, before pulling her into a kiss that had turned heated enough that they'd migrated to his bedroom for the first time. Afterward, Tangled in sheets that probably cost more than Lena's first car, Victor had traced patterns on her bare shoulder and asked, "Are you okay? We can slow down if this is too fast." But Lena felt safer than she had in years, wrapped in his arms, desired without being diminished. "I'm okay. Better than okay." "Good," Victor had murmured against her hair. "Because I'm not sure I could let you go now, even if I wanted to." The possessiveness in his voice should have triggered warning bells. Instead, it felt like security, like being chosen and valued and kept safe. Victor's mother arrived on a Thursday afternoon in a car service from the airport, and Lena watched from the window as a small, elegant woman with silver-streaked dark hair emerged, looking up at the estate with an expression Lena couldn't read. "She's going to hate me," Lena said, wringing her hands. Victor came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "She's going to love you. Trust me." "How can you possibly know that?" "Because I told her about you, about what you survived, about how you left when staying would have been easier." His arms tightened around her. "My mother appreciates strength. You have it in spades." Lena took a deep breath and turned in his arms, reaching up to straighten his collar, even though it didn't need straightening. "Okay, let's do this." Elena Moreau was smaller than Lena had expected, barely 5'3", but she radiated the kind of presence that had nothing to do with physical size. She swept into the entrance hall, hugged Victor tightly enough to make him grunt, then turned to Lena with dark eyes that missed nothing. "So you're the one who finally caught my son's attention," Elena said, her accent faintly Spanish, softened by years in America. "Let me look at you." Lena stood still while Elena studied her, feeling like she was being assessed and categorized and judged all at once. Then Elena smiled, warm and genuine, and pulled Lena into a hug that smelled like lavender and vanilla. "Welcome to the family, mija," Elena said. "Victor has told me so much about you." "All good things, I hope," Lena managed. "Mostly true things, which is better." Elena released her and linked their arms together. "Now, show me around this ridiculous house my son bought. I want to see what he's done with all that money he makes doing things I don't ask about." The afternoon passed in a way Lena hadn't expected. Elena was funny, sharp, and completely unimpressed by her son's wealth or power. She critiqued his decorating choices, asked Lena pointed questions about her intentions, and told embarrassing stories about Victor's childhood that made him groan and Lena laugh until her sides hurt. Over tea in the library, Elena turned serious, fixing Lena with a look that reminded her uncomfortably of Victor. "My son cares about you, more than I've seen him care about anyone. But he's also my son, which means he has his father's stubbornness and his father's temper." "Mom," Victor warned from his chair. Elena ignored him. "If he ever makes you feel small, if he ever makes you question your worth, you call me immediately. I didn't raise him to be his father, but sometimes patterns are inherited whether we want them or not." The concern in her voice, the fierce protectiveness, made Lena's throat tight. "Thank you, but Victor's been nothing but respectful, more than respectful." "Good, keep it that way." Elena turned to her son. "And you, don't mess this up. This one's special." "I know," Victor said quietly, his eyes on Lena. "Believe me, I know." That night, after Elena had retired to one of the guest rooms, Lena found Victor on the balcony off his bedroom, staring out at the city lights in the distance. "Your mother's wonderful," Lena said, sliding under his arm when he lifted it in invitation. "She liked you. That's high praise. She doesn't like most people." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "She also pulled me aside and threatened to castrate me if I hurt you." Lena laughed. "She did not." "She absolutely did." In very creative detail, Victor's arm tightened around her shoulders. "She's protective. She knows what it's like to love the wrong man." "Are you the wrong man for me?" Lena asked quietly. Victor was silent for a long moment. "I don't know. I'm trying very hard to be the right one, but I'm learning as I go, and I'm probably going to mess up." "Then we'll mess up together," Lena said, echoing Mrs. Chen's words, "and we'll figure out how to fix it." She felt Victor's smile against her hair. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise. You just didn't notice because I was too busy being invisible." "Never again," Victor said fiercely. "I see you, Lena Park. Every day, every moment. You're impossible to miss." They stood together in the cool evening air, and Lena felt something settle in her chest, something that felt like the beginning of trust, the foundation of something real. A month later, Lena started classes at the local university, studying business management with a minor in nonprofit administration. She commuted 3 days a week, did homework in the estate's library, and slowly built a life that was hers but also interwoven with Victor's. They fought occasionally, about her taking too many classes, about him working too late, about the appropriate level of security detail when she went grocery shopping. But they also learned how to fight fair, how to apologize, how to compromise. Lena met with a therapist Victor's mother recommended, working through the trauma Evan had left behind, learning to recognize the difference between control and care, between possession and partnership. And slowly, carefully, she began to believe that maybe she deserved good things, that maybe survival wasn't the ceiling but the floor, and there was room above it to build something beautiful. 3 months into their relationship, Lena woke one morning feeling off, nauseous in a way that had nothing to do with the dinner they'd eaten the night before. She made it to the bathroom just in time, and afterwards sat on the cool tile floor, her mind racing through possibilities. It couldn't be. They'd been careful. Mostly careful. There'd been that one night when careful had been the last thing on either of their minds, when want had overridden sense. Lena pulled out her phone and searched for the nearest pharmacy, then sent a text to Mrs. Chen asking for a car to take her on an errand. She didn't want to involve Victor, not until she knew for sure, not until she'd processed what this might mean. 2 hours later, she sat in her bathroom staring at 3 positive pregnancy tests, her hands shaking, her heart racing, her mind a complete blank. She was pregnant, with Victor's child. After everything with Evan, after building this fragile new life, after finally feeling like she had solid ground under her feet, the universe had decided to throw her a curveball that felt more like a boulder. A knock on her suite door made her jump. "Lena, Mrs. Chen said you weren't feeling well. Can I come in?" Victor's voice, concerned and gentle. Lena stared at the tests, at the plus signs that were going to change everything, and made a decision. "Come in," she called. She heard him cross her suite, heard him pause at the bathroom door. "Lena, what's wrong?" She opened the door, holding one of the tests, and watched his face as he processed what he was seeing. His eyes went wide. His gaze snapped from the test to her face and back again. "You're pregnant." "Yes," Lena whispered. "I'm sorry. I know this wasn't planned. I know it's too soon. I know—" Victor crossed the space between them in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. She felt him trembling against her, felt the rapid hammer of his heart against her chest. "Don't apologize," he said roughly. "Don't you dare apologize for this." Lena pulled back enough to see his face, to search for the anger or resentment or fear she'd expected. Instead, she found wonder, fierce and bright and overwhelming. "You're happy?" she asked incredulously. "I'm terrified," Victor admitted. "I'm completely unprepared. I have no idea how to be a father, but yes, I'm happy. I'm so goddamn happy I can barely think straight." He kissed her then, deep and claiming and full of promise, and Lena kissed back, tasting salt and realizing she was crying, that they were both crying, that this impossible thing was happening and maybe it was exactly what they needed. "We can do this," Victor said when they finally broke apart. "Together. We can figure it out." Lena looked up at the man who'd seen her when no one else had, who'd given her back her strength and then stood beside her while she learned to use it, and felt something settle in her chest. This wasn't the life she'd planned. It was better. "Together," she agreed. And in that moment, with Victor's arms around her and their future unfolding in ways neither of them had expected, Lena Park finally understood what it meant to be truly seen, truly valued, truly home. The pregnancy changed everything in ways both profound and surprisingly mundane. Victor became obsessively protective, which Lena found both endearing and infuriating in equal measure. He wanted her to stop going to classes, to stay home where it was safe, to let him hire a full-time nurse to monitor her health. Lena refused all of it with the same stubbornness that had helped her survive Evan. that had helped her build a new life from nothing. "I'm pregnant, not dying," she said one morning when he suggested she skip her morning lecture. "Women have been doing this for thousands of years. I think I can manage attending university while growing a human." "But what if something happens? What if you get tired or stressed or then I'll sit down and rest like a normal person." Lena crossed the space between them and took his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "You can't bubble wrap me, Victor. I won't let you." She watched him struggle with it, watched the fear and the need to control war across his features. But then he took a deep breath and nodded, pressing his forehead to hers. "Okay, but you call me if you feel even slightly off. Promise me." "I promise." It became their pattern. Victor would worry, Lena would set boundaries, and they'd meet somewhere in the middle. It wasn't always smooth, but it was real, and Lena appreciated that more than she could express. The news spread through the household within days despite their attempts at discretion. Mrs. Chen had somehow known before Lena told her, producing ginger tea and crackers for the morning sickness, with the efficient calm of someone who'd seen it all before. Elena called from Florida and burst into tears of joy, immediately booking a flight to visit. Marcus, stoic as ever, simply nodded and increased the security detail around Lena without being asked. Lena's mother was released from the hospital a week after they learned about the pregnancy, her cancer in remission, her strength returning. She moved into one of the estate's guest rooms, and Lena braced herself for judgment, for lectures about moving too fast with a dangerous man. Instead, her mother took one look at Victor, at the way he hovered protectively near Lena, at the softness in his eyes when he looked at her daughter, and said quietly, "He's nothing like Evan." "No," Lena agreed. "He's nothing like Evan." "Good. That boy nearly destroyed you." Her mother's hand found Lena's, squeezing gently. "This one looks at you like you hung the moon. Don't let him put you on a pedestal, but don't be afraid to let him love you either." It was the most her mother had ever said about Lena's relationship with Evan, the closest she'd come to acknowledging the hell Lena had survived. The words settled something in Lena's chest, some knot of anxiety she'd been carrying about her mother's approval. 3 weeks after the positive test, Lena was studying in the library when her phone rang with an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Lena Park?" The voice was female, professional, unfamiliar. "This is she." "My name is Detective Sarah Martinez with the District Attorney's Office. I'm calling about Evan Cross." Lena's blood went cold. "What about him? He's in prison. The plea deal was signed." "He was in prison," Detective Martinez corrected gently. "He was released 3 days ago. There was an administrative error with his sentencing calculation. He's out on parole." The world tilted sideways. Lena gripped the edge of the desk, her free hand going automatically to her still flat stomach. "That's not possible. He was supposed to serve 5 years." "I know. And I'm deeply sorry. The error has been identified and we're working to correct it, but the process takes time. In the meantime, I wanted to inform you personally and urge you to take precautions. His parole conditions include staying away from you, but a piece of paper didn't stop him before," Lena finished numbly. "Thank you for calling, Detective." She hung up and sat frozen, her mind racing through implications and possibilities and fears. Evan was out. Evan knew about the pregnancy by now. It had been in several gossip columns, speculation about Victor Moreau's mysterious girlfriend expecting his child. Evan would see that as the ultimate betrayal, the final insult. "Lena?" She looked up to find Victor in the doorway, his expression already shifting from casual to concerned as he read her face. "What happened?" "Evan's out." The words came out flat, emotionless. "Administrative error. They let him out early." Victor's expression went glacial. He pulled out his phone, already dialing. "Marcus, conference room, now. We have a situation." Within an hour, Lena found herself sitting at a table in Victor's home office, surrounded by security personnel, lawyers, and Detective Martinez on speakerphone. They discussed options, protocols, contingency plans. Victor wanted Lena confined to the estate. The lawyers recommended filing for an emergency restraining order. Marcus suggested hiring additional security. Lena listened to them talk about her, around her, as though she were a problem to be solved rather than a person with agency. The familiar feeling of being controlled, of decisions being made for her, crept up her spine like ice water. "Stop," she said quietly. The conversation continued. "Stop," she repeated, louder this time. Victor's hand found hers under the table, squeezing gently. "Everyone, give us a moment." The room cleared in under a minute, leaving them alone. Victor turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Tell me what you're thinking." "I'm thinking that I didn't escape one controlling relationship just to end up in another, where everyone makes decisions about my safety without asking what I want." Lena pulled her hand from his, needing the space to think clearly. "I appreciate the concern. I do. But I need to have a say in this." "Of course you do." Victor's voice was carefully neutral. "What do you want?" "I want to stop hiding. I want to stop letting Evan Cross dictate how I live my life." Lena stood, pacing to the window that overlooked the gardens. "He's been controlling me for years, Victor. When we were together, after we broke up, even from prison, he's been this shadow I can't escape, this fear that lives in my chest, and I'm done." "What are you proposing?" Lena turned to face him, and she felt the decision crystallize in her mind with perfect clarity. "I want to make a statement, a real one. I want to go public with my story, on my terms, so it's not whispers and speculation and rumors. I want everyone to know exactly what Evan Cross is and exactly what he did." Victor's jaw tightened. "That will make you a target. Every detail of your life will be picked apart by strangers. You'll be judged, criticized, questioned about why you stayed, why you left, every choice you made." "I know, but I'll be doing it on my terms, not having it exposed in bits and pieces, not living in fear of when he'll strike next." Lena crossed back to him, kneeling so they were eye to eye. "I survived him, Victor. I'm not just a victim. I'm a survivor, and I want people to know the difference." She watched him process it, watched the protective instinct war with respect for her autonomy. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Okay, if that's what you want, then that's what we'll do. But we do it smart. Controlled interview, reputable journalist, recorded so nothing can be taken out of context. And I want you there," Lena added. "I want people to see us together, to understand that this baby isn't a mistake or something to be ashamed of. That I chose this life, chose you, chose to build something new." Something fierce and possessive flashed in Victor's eyes. "Are you sure about this? Once it's out there, you can't take it back." "I've never been more sure of anything." Lena took his hands in hers. "Evan controlled my narrative for too long. It's time I took it back." The interview was scheduled for the following week with a journalist Victor's team had carefully vetted. Catherine Rothschild offered her home as a neutral location, and her publicist helped coordinate the logistics. The night before the interview, Lena couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind racing through everything she wanted to say, everything she was afraid of revealing. Around midnight, she gave up and padded through the connecting door to Victor's suite. She found him at his desk, working despite the late hour. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression softened. "Can't sleep?" "Too much in my head." Lena crossed to him, and he pulled her into his lap without hesitation, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What if I mess this up? What if I say something wrong, or cry, or make everything worse?" "Then you'll be human. That's not a flaw, Lena. That's what will make people listen." His hand splayed across her stomach, where the smallest hint of a curve was just beginning to show. "You're the strongest person I know. You're going to be fine." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've watched you survive things that would have broken most people. Because you chose to leave instead of stay. Because you're sitting here worrying about messing up instead of hiding from the hard thing." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "That's not weakness. That's courage." Lena leaned back against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "I'm glad you're going to be there." "There's nowhere else I'd rather be." The interview took place in Catherine's elegant sitting room, cameras discreetly positioned. The journalist, a woman named Rebecca Chen, who'd built her career on sensitive, nuanced storytelling, sitting across from them with kind eyes and a recording device. Rebecca started with easy questions: how they met, what had attracted them to each other, the pregnancy news, and how they'd reacted. Lena answered honestly, her hand in Victor's, feeling his steady presence grounding her. Then Rebecca shifted, her expression turning more serious. Lena, there's been a lot of speculation about your relationship with Evan Cross. Can you tell me about that? This was it. The moment she either owned her story or let others define it for her. Lena took a deep breath and began to speak. She told the truth. All of it. The slow progression from charming to controlling, the jealousy that had seemed flattering at first, then suffocating. The first time Evan had shoved her, how he'd apologized so profusely she'd convinced herself it was an accident. The escalation. The fear. The night she'd finally left, taking only what she could carry and running before he came home. She talked about the restraining order, the hospital visits, the shame that had kept her silent for so long. She talked about rebuilding her life one minimum wage job at a time, about learning to trust her own judgment again. And she talked about Victor, about how he'd seen her when she was invisible, how he'd given her back her strength instead of taking it away, how he'd shown her what respect looked like in a relationship. Evan's out of prison now, Rebecca said gently. How does that make you feel? Terrified, Lena admitted, but also angry. Angry that an administrative error means he gets to walk free while I'm still dealing with the consequences of what he did. Angry that the system that's supposed to protect survivors so often fails us. What do you want people to know about domestic violence? About survival? Lena looked directly at the camera, thinking about all the women watching who might be living through their own version of her nightmare. I want them to know that leaving is possible. It's hard, it's terrifying, you might lose everything, but it's possible. And I want them to know that what happened to you doesn't define you. You're not damaged or broken or less than. You're a survivor, and that makes you stronger than you realize. She felt Victor's hand tighten on hers, felt the support radiating from him. And to the abusers, Lena continued, her voice steady and strong, I want you to know that we're not your property. We're not yours to control or diminish or destroy. We're human beings with value and dignity, and we deserve better than what you've given us. You don't get to define our stories anymore. We do. When the interview wrapped 2 hours later, Lena felt wrung out but lighter somehow, as though speaking the truth had released something she'd been carrying for years. The interview aired 3 days later on prime time. Lena watched it with Victor, her mother, Elena, and Mrs. Chen gathered in the sitting room. She barely recognized herself on screen, this poised, articulate woman talking about trauma with such clarity and strength. You did beautifully, her mother said, tears streaming down her face. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Social media exploded with support, with other survivors sharing their own stories, with praise for Lena's courage. The interview was shared thousands of times, trending on multiple platforms, sparking conversations about domestic violence and the failures of the justice system. But not all the response was positive. There were the expected trolls, the victim blamers, the people who questioned why she'd stayed, why she'd left, why she was with Victor now. Lena read some of the comments before Victor gently took her phone away. Don't torture yourself, he said. You can't control how people react. You can only control your truth, and you told it perfectly. 2 days after the interview aired, Detective Martinez called again. Ms. Park, I wanted to inform you that Evan Cross has been taken back into custody. After your interview aired, 3 other women came forward with allegations of abuse from prior relationships. Combined with the parole violations we documented, he's looking at additional charges and significant prison time. Lena's knees went weak with relief. How long? 15 to 20 years if the prosecutor gets what they're asking for. And this time there won't be any administrative errors. Martinez's voice softened. What you did, going public like that, it gave other survivors the courage to speak up. You might have just saved lives, Ms. Park. After hanging up, Lena found Victor in his office and told him the news. He pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was something infinitely precious. It's really over, she whispered against his chest. He's really gone. Really gone, Victor confirmed. You're safe, Lena. Completely safe. The months that followed felt like learning to breathe in a world without fear. Lena continued her classes, her pregnancy progressing normally, her body changing in ways both fascinating and uncomfortable. She started speaking publicly about domestic violence, partnering with local shelters and advocacy groups, using her platform to help other survivors. Victor proposed on a Tuesday evening with no fanfare or elaborate production. They were having dinner in the sitting room, Lena complaining about her swollen feet, when he suddenly got down on one knee with a ring box in his hand. "I had this whole thing planned," he said, looking almost nervous for the first time since she'd known him. "Romantic dinner, perfect setting, speech I'd been working on for weeks. But then I realized that's not us. We're takeout in our pajamas and honest conversations and building something real in the middle of chaos." Lena's heart was hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. "I love you, Lena Park. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you refuse to let anyone make you small. I love that you challenge me and call me on my bullshit and make me want to be better than I am." He opened the box to reveal a simple platinum band with a single diamond. "I want to spend the rest of my life earning the privilege of standing beside you. Will you marry me?" Lena didn't hesitate. "Yes." The ring fit perfectly, and Victor kissed her with a tenderness that made her eyes water. "I was terrified you'd say no." "I was terrified you'd never ask." Lena laughed through tears. "I love you too, Victor Moreau, even when you're overprotective and controlling and impossible." "Especially then?" "Especially then." They married 2 months later in a small ceremony in the estate's gardens, surrounded by the people who mattered. Lena's mother walked her down the aisle, beaming with health and happiness. Elena cried through the entire ceremony. Mrs. Chen coordinated everything with military precision, and Victor looked at Lena like she was the answer to questions he'd spent his whole life asking. When the officiant pronounced them married, when Victor kissed her in front of their gathered family and friends, Lena felt something shift in her chest. This was home. This man, this life, this future they were building together. This was home in a way nothing else had ever been. Their daughter was born 6 weeks later, a week early and impatient to meet the world. Victor held Lena's hand through 18 hours of labor, looking more terrified than she'd ever seen him. And when the doctor finally placed their daughter in Lena's arms, they both cried. "She's perfect," Victor whispered, his finger tracing their daughter's tiny hand. "What should we name her?" They'd discussed names for months without settling on anything, but looking at her daughter's face, seeing the perfect combination of herself and Victor in those delicate features, Lena knew. "Hope," she said. "Her name is Hope." Victor's eyes met hers, understanding the significance. Hope for a better future. Hope for healing. Hope for all the survivors who would come after. "Hope Moreau," he said, testing it out. "It's perfect. She's perfect. You're perfect." Lena looked at her husband, at their daughter, at the life she'd built from the ashes of her worst nightmare, and felt gratitude swell in her chest so huge it was almost painful. She'd started as the invisible girl, the one who cleaned floors and kept her head down and tried not to exist. She'd been diminished and controlled and nearly destroyed, but she'd survived. She'd fought her way back to herself. She'd learned to be seen, to be valued, to take up space in the world without apology. And now she was a wife, a mother, a survivor, a voice for those who couldn't yet speak for themselves. Evan Cross had tried to make her nothing. Instead, he'd inadvertently put her on a path to becoming everything, to herself, to Victor, to the daughter now sleeping peacefully in her arms. The invisible girl had become impossible to miss. And that, Lena thought, as Victor pressed a kiss to her temple and whispered promises about their future, was the best kind of justice there was. 6 months after Hope's birth, Lena stood at a podium in front of 300 people at a domestic violence awareness gala, her daughter sleeping in Elena's arms in the front row, Victor standing in the wings watching her with pride written across every line of his face. "My name is Lena Moreau," she began, her voice clear and strong and certain. "And I'm a survivor." She told her story again because it needed to be told, because other women needed to hear it. But this time, she also told the next chapter, the one about rebuilding, about trust, about learning to love again after trauma. "Survival isn't the end of the story," she said, looking out at the faces watching her, seeing understanding and pain and hope reflected back. "It's the beginning, what you do after, who you become, the life you build from the ruins, that's what matters. That's what transforms victimhood into victory." When she finished speaking, the applause was thunderous. But what mattered most was the woman who approached her afterward, tears streaming down her face, whispering, "Thank you. I'm leaving him tomorrow. Your story gave me the courage." And Lena hugged her, this stranger who was also a sister in survival, and said, "You can do this. You're stronger than you know, and you deserve everything good this world has to offer." Later that night, back at the estate that had become home, Lena stood in the nursery watching Hope sleep, Victor's arms around her waist, his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured. "How far we've come. How different everything is from where we started. Any regrets?" Lena leaned back against him, feeling the solid strength of the man who'd seen her when no one else had, who'd helped her find herself again, who loved her with a fierceness that still took her breath away. "Not a single one," she said, and in that moment, standing in the soft glow of the nursery nightlight, surrounded by the family they'd built and the life they'd created, Lena Moreau, finally understood what it meant to be completely, utterly, beautifully seen. The invisible girl was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who knew her worth, claimed her space, and refused to let anyone make her small ever again. And that woman, that survivor, that fighter, she was exactly who she was always meant to be. The end.